Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. Trevor, Sikkema, this Dalton, Wasserman. Day 3 of free agency, or I should say, tampering period coverage here on the YouTube channel and on the podcast format. We are excited to continue to break down all of these moves because, Dalton, honestly, I thought we were going to slow down a little bit. All right, we had a flurry of moves that happened on Monday, and I was like, wow, okay, we're getting it all out of the way, right off the bat. And then Tuesday came around, and it was still an avalanche of news where we got to talk about, where players were going for how much money, the team fits, all that. And here we are, 24 hours after that show. We're back, baby. We're ready to do it again because we got a lot more signings that we got to get to and we got to discuss. How you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm good. Like you mentioned, the whirlwind is slowing down a little bit. It feels like we've hit that period where we're getting now a bunch of veteran players on short-term deals, and we're just kind of waiting out a couple of quarterback situations, and maybe with some of the names involved, we expected to do that, but it's getting interesting on that front. No, I think we start to see a lot of these hauls for these teams kind of take shape, and we can start breaking them down as far as how they help that specific team, and for some of them, how they can help them compete for a postseason spot.
If you guys want to follow along during this show or any other time that this show isn't live, you can go over to pff.com, check out our free agency tracker. We've got all sorts of information for you and different ways to categorize it. If you are a fan of a certain team, for example, if you are a Seahawks fan, you're like, man, we still really need to address the interior offensive line. You can go to pff.com, go to the free agency tracker, and you can look at just all of the interior offensive linemen that are still available. You can see the guys that have signed already, how much money they have signed for, or if you go, I can't remember all of the players that my team signed. Well, if you scroll down a little bit, then we categorize it by team as well. So however you want to look at this free agency class, whether it's what has happened, whether it's what could still happen, going over to pff.com, make sure you guys go check that out because it's a great tool to help you out for free agency all week long. And to be honest with you, I need it all the time because I can't keep up with every single move. And as we're talking about it here on the show, I'm going to reference that plenty. Let's start with quarterbacks. I feel like we should. We haven't had big quarterback news that's broken over the last, say, like 24, maybe 20-ish hours. But in a little bit of a recap here for the quarterback position, Sam Darnold obviously signed him with the Seattle Seahawks. That happened a couple of days ago. We got Justin Fields with the New York Jets, and we already gave our analysis on that on yesterday's show. Daniel Jones signed with the Indianapolis Colts for what Dalton says is week 1 money for $14 million in a 1-year deal. Guys who are still available: Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, Jacoby Brissett. We actually got to update that because I believe it was this morning or late last night he signed with the Arizona Cardinals, so he's going to be the backup there to Kyler Murray. Those 3 guys in the middle there: Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and I will throw Kirk Cousins in there as well. Although I'm going to be honest with you, Dalton, I'm not so convinced that Kirk Cousins is going to get released by the Atlanta Falcons. I think the Falcons said, hey, we signed you to this contract. You signed it. We signed it. If you being the backup quarterback here is what we think helps us the most and gives us the most value that we have in this current situation, we're not going to release you. We don't owe you anything. We want you to be the backup here in case something happens to Michael Penix. So I'm not so sure that he hits the market. Got a couple of teams that still have quarterback needs. Pittsburgh Steelers are one of them. New York Giants are another. What do you think about Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, maybe Kirk Cousins? Little potential landing spots for those guys before we sort of get into the signings that did happen over the last 20 hours.
So it seems obvious with Rodgers, and he's waiting to make a decision, that the Pittsburgh Steelers are the most interested, and that's what they're waiting for. They feel like Rodgers is an upgrade on Russell Wilson. Statistically, I honestly don't know necessarily that that's the case, and especially with the Steelers' questions at offensive tackle and Rodgers being less mobile than Wilson, I'm not sure that that's the best solution, but they feel that that's it, and they're waiting on Rodgers to make that decision. Wilson seems like the guy the most in limbo here, right? Because he still feels like maybe a fallback option for the Steelers. Apparently the Giants don't have as much interest in him as we thought. So where else are we talking about that Wilson can go and compete for a starting job, right? I mean, I know there's been some talk that, now with Daniel Jones gone, that the Minnesota Vikings need a backup quarterback or someone to kind of usher in J.J. McCarthy to that starting role. But Wilson, I think, is in the most limbo. I don't know. It seems like all the options for him have kind of dwindled when you think about also the Raiders going and trading for Geno Smith. That was an option to reunite with Pete Carroll, but I don't really know what to make of Russell Wilson's market right now. I think Jameis Winston is going to eventually, after these 2 guys sign, he's going to sign somewhere as a high-end backup. And Cousins, you mentioned it, is interesting. And the Falcons, look, the money associated with his contract this year, it's dead money regardless of what you're looking at, right? If you find a way to trade him, cut him, they're just in that scenario where they have all that guaranteed money for this season and they're stuck with it. But we have to remember, look, Cousins, as opposed to any of these other backup options, right? Winston, Marcus Mariota, Mason Rudolph, he's probably still a better player than them on a down-to-down basis. And two, he's been healthy the last 3 years, but we know Michael Penix Jr. has a long injury history going all the way back to his days in Indiana, and you don't really want to take a chance on losing what could be one of the best backup quarterbacks in the league if he has to fill in for him if Penix were to take an injury during a 17-game season. So I think the Falcons are actually kind of wise for keeping Cousins. It doesn't help them very much at all to get rid of him, and Cousins isn't a guy at all that's known to be a cancer in the locker room. He'll adjust to the role, maybe reluctantly, but I think he would be at least cordial when it comes to that, right? Just like he was at the end of this past season. But I think Rodgers, obviously, with the Pittsburgh domino and seeing where that goes is the first thing. And then I really, at this point, don't know what happens with Russell Wilson because it seems like he's running out of options.
And we got some people in the chat who are already giving their predictions on quarterbacks. So, throughout this entire show, anybody who's watching the show, get in the chat on YouTube and we'll read some of these comments off. Tommy says Rodgers to Pittsburgh, Wilson to the Giants, Flacco to the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, very intriguing there. We've got a couple of quarterback predictions there. We've got Chargers fans are just clamoring for something at this point, and we'll get to the Chargers. But in all caps, we got in the chat, Joe Ortiz believes free agency starts today. We're good. There we go. The Chargers have been quiet, but it's because Joe Ortiz didn't know that we were hitting the gas pedal on Wednesday. He forgot about the tampering period. It's all right. It's understandable. Sometimes we all forget about it. And this is the Chargers day to get active. Look, when it comes to quarterbacks, I think the most intriguing part about all of this, to me, Dalton, at this point in time, the Titans aren't linked to any of these quarterbacks. The Titans aren't linked to anyone. Right? I mean, I sort of saw the Titans, I can't remember if it was Justin Fields or who it was, but like very loosely in a big group of teams of, these are the teams that might be interested in one of these quarterbacks. I have not heard anything concrete about the Titans really being interested in this veteran quarterback class at all whatsoever. Dude, they have Will Levis right now, and that's it. Literally nobody else. And they gave Will Levis the full scope to be their quarterback in Tennessee last year, and it just didn't happen. It did not manifest itself. And so there's no way the Titans go into next year. I'm not saying that Will Levis' NFL career is over, but there's no way they can go into 2025 with just Will Levis as their starting quarterback. And at this point in time, a lot of the major quarterback dominoes have already fallen. I guess if Rodgers was their starting quarterback, they could sort of convince themselves like, no, we're good to go. We're fine. But to me, Dalton, as quiet as the Titans' name has been on the quarterback front, that makes me think that Cam Ward's going one. I am so shocked that the Titans haven't done anything when it comes to quarterback, even been involved in some of these rumors and conversations. I feel like I just have not seen any of it, which makes me think that they're going to stay at number one and draft Cam. What do you think about the Titans being quiet here on the quarterback front?
Yeah, it's odd, too, that they're not even in the market for any of these backups, it seems like, right? They're willing to let Mason Rudolph test the market. We haven't heard them about any other even backup options, say a Mac Jones or even a reunion with a Marcus Mariota. But, yeah, no, it certainly makes you lean that way because there's no way they can walk into next season with Will Levis as the day one starter, right? They were already last in the league in passing grade this year between Levis and Mason Rudolph. And Levis just doesn't he doesn't embody what Brian Callahan wants out of the quarterback position, decision-making, accuracy, and timing. So I'm with you. It seems more and more likely now that we're going to get Cam Ward taken with that first overall pick. The league seems to have a higher opinion of him than Shedeur Sanders. For as much a luxury as it would be for the Titans to take Abdul Carter, you can't walk into next year with no viable quarterback. Even if you have an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter, you're not going to win very many games with Will Levis as your starting quarterback. We saw that the last 2 years. So I'm with you. It certainly seems like it's not a formality. This is a long way to go, but I think Cam Ward now becomes the heavy favorite to land that Titans job. Maybe they still have Russell Wilson as a fallback option, depending on where that market goes, and it's funny because they have a ton of cap space to work with. They could pay a guy like Russell Wilson or a high-end backup like Jameis Winston, and they're just not doing it. So I'm not sure what they're waiting on exactly, but it feels like Ward's the favorite now.
That's I think the exact same thing with the whole situation. I'm just so surprised at how quiet they have been on the quarterback front when it means so much to that franchise and how it was holding them back from last year and playing a lot better. All due respect to Joe Milton, I forgot to mention Joe Milton, who is now the hottest trade commodity for the quarterback position in the NFL. We've got a lot of people in the chat. We got Joe Milton to the New York Giants, Milton to the Steelers, and then Steve said Milton to New England, so I guess just doesn't think that he's going anywhere. Ravens fan says Milton to the UFL. Whoa. I'm not starting the show with any disrespect.
A little early for that, unless that's a GM for one of those UFL teams trying to clamor for it. But a little early for that. Joe Milton, we've only seen him one game.
Yeah, one game, and he looked like an absolute god showing off the cannon there for that last game of the season for the New England Patriots. So, yeah, I guess Joe Milton is maybe part of this quarterback conversation as well. The Patriots potentially putting him on the market for a team to maybe trade a decent asset for him because of what we saw last year. Who knows? All right, so let's get into some of these signings. As you guys are kind of watching and listening to this show live, shout out any of the teams that you would like for us to review or any of the moves that we've seen over the last 24 hours. If we don't get to them yet, we can kind of just bounce around throughout the show. I do want to start with the Buffalo Bills because, man, it feels like the Buffalo Bills are having a really good free agency period. And it's maybe not one that's earth-shattering, but over the last 20 hours specifically, they've also added Joey Bosa. They've added Larry Ogunjobi. And when you just throw in the fact that they have, they continue to fortify their defensive line. They re-signed Greg Rousseau. They brought in Michael Hoyt as well from the Los Angeles Rams. Like this is now a handful of defensive line additions while also keeping guys like Terrell Bernard, Ty Johnson was re-signed, Khalil Shakir, obviously the big Josh Allen news last week as well. Dalton, I really love what the Buffalo Bills are doing. This is a team that obviously has been on the cusp of potentially making a Super Bowl over the last 3 or 4 years, and I think this offseason, where it wasn't the biggest cannonball of a splash that they could make, it was pretty dang good for them considering what their needs were, and especially going into the draft, allowing them to sort of capitalize on being a late first-round pick, so you don't really have a lot of control over who's going to make it to you at that point. But I really love what the Buffalo Bills have done addressing a lot of new bodies that they now have on that defensive line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that was really the first big problem. I mean, they had issues on all three levels of their defense, but I think that the thing that I specifically look at is their run defense. Right now, Larry Ogunjobi kind of had a decline the last couple of years in that. Joey Bosa with a decent run defense grade last year, 67.4. Obviously, the injuries have sapped some of the pass rush potential, but they're betting that there's still something left in the tank, right? Even in 2023, still had an 80 pass rush grade. I think the injuries over the last few years have really limited him as far as snap count. You're not going to play him every single down, but if you have the depth with guys like Michael Hoyt, with A.J. Epinesa, obviously Greg Rousseau is going to play at least 80% of the snaps. You're talking about a rotation here that can be very effective, right, with guys playing in the right role. And I think signing Bosa and having depth behind him, not asking him to play every snap, even though he's still relatively young, he's going to be 30 years old on opening day, just had all the injuries the last few years that have racked that up. So I still think defensive line is something that they're going to address in this draft, but they have more veteran depth to live with here. So they're not asking any single player other than maybe Rousseau and Ed Oliver to carry the lion's share of the work, right? And I think that's big for them. If you're not going to have maybe a line full of stars, you have a lot of depth. You have a lot of guys that can rotate in and be effective for, say, 25 to maybe 30 snaps a game in their role. And if you're keeping them all fresh through all 4 quarters, then you've got something that you can go, okay, this is a foundation we have, and then we just got to add on the back end of our defense to fix the coverage a little bit, and you're getting that 3-layered approach. So I do like, if you're not going to get the stars, and they don't have money to pay stars right now in this free agency period, you're talking about building that depth, getting guys in specialized roles, and improving the unit as a whole.
Yeah, it felt like they were sort of holding on to a little bit of what was their chips on the table with some of their defensive linemen last year. It was kind of that last year of those guys that were there, and now you're retooling it, right? I mean, you're moving on from a guy like Von Miller, you're changing guys around on the defensive line, and now just as a whole, their defensive line looks like this. It's Greg Rousseau, it's Daquan Jones, it's Ed Oliver. Now you're adding Joey Bosa to the mix, and even if Joey Bosa is not what he was, he's still somebody who could be serviceable, especially in a rotation when you're not putting a ton on his plate. Michael Hoyt, who's a very versatile guy, he can play anything from a three technique guy all the way out to a 7 technique. He's very versatile in how the Buffalo Bills like to rotate and stay versatile along their defensive line. They've got Larry Ogunjobi now, A.J. Epinesa, and then you throw in the fact that they have the guys that they drafted last year as well in Javon Solomon and Dwayne Carter. That all of a sudden is a really good defensive line to me. So somebody in the chat was saying, like, hey, imagine if Kenneth Grant still falls to them at the back end of the first round. I could see them still drafting interior defensive line, but now it makes it feel like, okay, they truly have total flexibility. If they wanted to draft another guy at the back end of the first round on the defensive line, they could, but they don't have to. I'm wondering if cornerback becomes a lot more of the priority. Maybe they'll try to trade up if a guy like Jahdae Barron or Will Johnson takes a little bit of a fall. Are they going to get aggressive in that regard? Do they go to the other side of the ball? The offensive line was great last season, but do they think that they have somebody in the receiving room? I know they signed Josh Palmer, but Amari Cooper's a free agent, so they believe that maybe one of those top-tier wide receivers, if a Luther Burden, a Tetsuo McMillan if he's falling, a Matthew Golden, do any of those guys make sense for him? So I think it really opens things up for Buffalo, who I think was navigating this in a really good way. The chat was asking us to show a little bit of love to the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I don't want to give anything away yet because our grades aren't final, but I believe we had either an A or an A+ for the Minnesota Vikings so far when it came to free agency. We'll have a show a little bit later in the week when we finalize those and be able to give you guys some free agent grades for every single team. But that's just a little teaser there for you because we love what the Vikings have done. Going to get Ryan Kelly, going to get Will Fries, investing in the interior offensive line, and then it's Javon Hargrave. Okay, maybe Javon Hargrave's not quite what he used to be, but then you're adding a John Allen as well. These are veteran pieces that are really helping out both of the interiors, and in my opinion, two of the biggest issues that they had last year, and that was on a team that won 14 regular season games. I mean, the Vikings played incredibly well, and yet they still spent a lot of money this offseason to make sure that they were where they needed to be roster-wise for J.J. McCarthy to come in. And I think they know that they're going to have some rookie learning moments from J.J. McCarthy, but as long as the rest of the team is set up the way that it currently is, what they've done in free agency, that allows them to have some of those games where, think about the Broncos last year, right? Bo Nix was great for some games, but then there were also games where he was a lot more quiet. He wasn't quite his takeover. But the Broncos defense was so good that it kept them in those ball games. I think that is an important part of what the Vikings are having to go through and a way that they approach this free agency period. So I love the fact that they didn't look at this 14-win season and say, hey, we got aggressive in the draft last year. We hit it with Sam Darnold. Our team's pretty good. We're fine. We'll have McCarthy. Maybe we'll win a couple less games, but we'll be good. No. Make the changes you need to make. Get aggressive. You're clearly in a winning window, even with a quarterback change. And so I love what the Minnesota Vikings did.
I'm with you. It's the advantage of having McCarthy on that rookie contract and being able to spend those funds that you didn't have to spend on Sam Darnold on the rest of your team, right? You mentioned the interior on both sides of the ball. I really like the two moves they made at cornerback as well, keeping Byron Murphy Jr. around and signing Isaiah Rodgers away from the Eagles on a pretty affordable contract. He's got starting potential, and even then, he proved with the Eagles he was a really good third outside cornerback. If it's Murphy and Mekhi Blackman on the outside, fantastic, with Rodgers kind of rotating in with them, but they have a lot more flexibility on defense. They've certainly shored up the interior of the offensive line, and I think I'm with you. Considering the situation you're looking at, I could use another running back behind Aaron Jones, probably still use some more depth on that defensive line, but those two things are deeper parts of this draft. I'm more convinced than ever, I'm with you, that they may trade down from that number 24 spot, add a few more picks, add more to the depth of this team. And when you're talking about the type of team that you mentioned the Denver Broncos built, now the Vikings are trying to build, you're asking your quarterback, instead of taking a game over, just get through it without any huge mistakes, right? I think that was one of the best things that Bo Nix did, and he's always done going back to his time at Oregon, is just don't turn the football over. Don't put the ball in danger. Don't cost us the game. And if you just play your part, then you're talking about, okay, we're playing winning complementary football. I think Minnesota's trying to get there. Sam Darnold even did that to an extent last year, especially during the middle part of the season when he got really hot and then threw some of the big plays on top of it that Kevin O'Connell could create for him. But I think it's a really good situation right now for McCarthy to be in, as long as he's healthy, with the improvements on the offensive line, with Aaron Jones being re-signed, and then this defense rounding into shape.
Somebody in the chat is saying, hey, more importantly, what cigars does Trevor have in the humidor behind you? Got a couple of Davidoffs in there. Those are my favorite cigars, so just wanted to shout them out. One of my favorites. They're fantastic. Also in the chat, I love this one. We talk about this all the time. Sometimes people say, oh, sarcastically, you're the off-season champs. The scroll says, better to be off-season champs than the champs of nothing. Amen. as somebody who makes content covering this league, I absolutely agree. Yes, I love that saying. Better to be the champs of the offseason than in the champs of nothing, and give us something to talk about. While we were speaking about the Buffalo Bills, they also re-signed DeMar Hamlin, so just wanted to shout that out as well. Somebody in the chat asked about the Detroit Lions. I don't have the text right in front of me, but they were basically asking, did the Detroit Lions do enough? Are we worried about the Lions going into next season? They signed DJ Reed. They lose Carlton Davis, so you think that that's a little bit of an upgrade, but it's just a position that they were already losing. They re-signed Dan Skipper. They re-signed Derek Barnes, re-signed Marcus Davenport. They signed Roy Lopez as well, but they released Zadarius Smith. Did we think that the Buffalo Bills the Detroit Lions were going to be more active? I wasn't sure how active they were really going to be in free agency. I think that their focus really was on doing what they did in free agency and more just attacking the draft as aggressively as they possibly can. What do you think about Detroit? Was it more of a quiet free agent period than you believed? Because I like the one splash that they made with DJ Reed, but what's your thoughts here?
I think Reed, especially at the price they got him at, it's a fantastic signing. And to have that stability across from Terrion Arnold, Ennis Reichstraw, the rest of that secondary is great. I think the big thing you look at, again, edge rusher, right? Aiden Hutchinson coming off the injury and Zadarius Smith being released. I know they re-signed Marcus Davenport, but they really need that number 2 type edge rusher. And as they're currently constructed, I would say there's probably, what do you think, Trev, an 80-90% chance they're taking an edge rusher late in the first round here now, because that's the one gaping hole. Even on this defense, if the linebacker core is healthy and Jack Campbell plays the way he did down the stretch last season, it's that defensive end spot that you're looking at. It's getting Hutchinson healthy, and it's finding any sort of pass rush support. Now, it's also something that, it's a position that's known to be traded for midseason, as they did with Zadarius Smith. You can find it during the season at times as well from a losing team that's looking to offload a piece. But I think that's the main obvious need now, is if they can improve their pass rush, then you've got an elite, well-rounded football team, right? And I think that's the thing that left them once Hutchinson got hurt last year. They tried to replace it with Zadarius, but that's where I'm looking. I haven't seen him do anything other than keep Marcus Davenport on the edge market. Now I have to go into this draft thinking that is the number one most obvious need early in this draft. I know there's been some talk about interior offensive line, and I'm a little surprised, too, that they haven't been more in on Kevin Zeitler and keeping him, but look, we've talked about this guy before. Maybe they just believe Christian Mahogany is going to be their starting right guard, and they're just going to go about it that way and save the money that they would have spent on Zeitler and get a little bit younger. And he looked good in a couple of starts he made last year. But edge rusher is the obvious need from here in. I think they have to find any sort of way to revamp it and improve their pass rush. I think I should mention, too, on the interior, they're going to get Aleem McNeil back healthy, and he's an absolute star on the inside. So if they can fill out this defensive line with one more star, then you're talking about a defense that starts catching up to the rest of the league.
Yeah, I think that they just feel really good about Christian Mahogany really stepping into that guard spot, because he started 2 games last season. I've got the numbers up in front of me right now. Overall blocking grade of a 76.2 in the first game that he started. He played 65 snaps in that game. And then in the divisional round playoff game against the Commanders, he got 69 snaps in that game, 92.3 overall blocking grade with a 91.9 run blocking grade. So I think that when he got drafted by the Detroit Lions, I love the fit. I thought it was the perfect fit for where Christian Mahogany could have gone. Just a powerful offensive line that likes to move you in between the tackles. So I don't have any problem with them being a little bit cooler on Zeitler, seeing what his market is elsewhere. If he was going to get a bag somewhere else, I think they were okay with it. I'm not shutting the door on him potentially coming back to the Lions, but it's got to be at a much lower price because of how comfortable they are with Christian Mahogany. So I do think that they did enough in free agency, and like you said, health is the main thing. If you look at this roster on paper, it's still one of the best rosters in the NFL. It's now just about attacking that first round and that edge rush position the way that they need to, and they have a decent amount of picks in this draft. They have an extra comp pick at the back end of the third round, and then they actually have 2 additional 7th-round picks and an additional 6th-round pick as well. I see the super chat in there, so we're going to get to the super chat in a second. We had Greg Gaines re-signing with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Buccaneers bringing the band back together, right? From what we saw last season, it's basically everybody that was there last year, minus Liam Cohen. So we'll see. And Josh Gizzard was already on staff, and so he just gets elevated to the offensive coordinator position and play caller position there in Tampa. So if you liked a lot of what you saw in Tampa Bay last year, it's a lot of the same stuff. And then we'll see what they do with pick number 19 in the first round. So I want to touch on Miami and Baltimore are 2 teams that people in the chat are talking about, so I want to get to them. But Ladarian Carr in the chat gave us a super chat here. Salute. We appreciate the super chat there. Is there a wide receiver that the Panthers can get in free agency or a trade? And we've talked about this before with Carolina. They have a wide receiver need, but it's not like any wide receiver, right? They have a lot of wide receivers on the roster already. They're missing the wide receiver one. They're missing that top tier guy. That's why I've said this before as a draft strategy with the Panthers. It's not, they'll draft one in round 2 or round 3 or something like that. To me, it's basically like, are you drafting Tetsuo McMillan at 8 or not? Because if not, I don't really see too much of a need for you to draft the depth wide receiver a little bit later in the draft, because their roster, let me see what it is right now, their wide receiver room. Jalen Coker, who was great last year. I want to make that very clear. I think he's certainly a guy who deserves some playing time coming up. Xavier Legette, who they're hoping can take another step into solidifying wide receiver 2 status for this team. Adam Thielen, who is obviously getting a little bit older. And then David Moore, but David Moore is a free agent. So you have a couple of, I would say all of those guys feel like wide receiver 3s right now. There's a chance that Jalen Coker or Xavier Legette could develop into that wide receiver 2 type of a player. Adam Thielen's a good player for you right now, but he's obviously getting up there in age. Is there somebody who's still out there, Dalton, who you think could be a target for the Panthers to make a big splash on, knowing that they also lost out on Milton Williams, so they probably got still a decent chunk of change to maybe go after a wide receiver like that? Is there a guy out there in the pro market, not in the draft market, in the pro market for Carolina at wide receiver?
It's tough because you're not really going to go get a slot guy. The problem is you've got those 3 guys, but you've got them in kind of redundant roles to what some of them can be, right? Like I think about a Keenan Allen or, somebody like that, or Elijah Moore who would play in the slot, but you already have Adam Thielen. They're probably not going to start over there, and Thielen's got really good chemistry with Bryce Young. I think about somebody maybe like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling, right, where you have that size and speed threat. Obviously, you're trying to work Xavier Legette into that role as well, but he's someone who helped the Saints a lot, adding an explosiveness to their offense last year, and I think that's still the element that you're looking for, right? I think they're trying to throw the ball down the field, right? You've got Legette with size and speed. You've got Jalen Coker with some size and speed. Maybe you add Valdez-Scantling as another body in that room, but as far as somebody that, like you mentioned, is going to be a difference maker and doesn't necessarily have a role that's redundant to the rest of the core, I don't know that there's a whole lot of options in the pro market, right? They could sign one more depth piece, but I think it's much more likely that you just mentioned it. I mean, if Tetsuo McMillan were on the board at 8 overall, I know they still have to fix more of this defense, right, and they want more star power on defense. But to get that number 1 receiver to now where it falls in line that Tet's a 6'5 freak that can do anything, Legette's a size speed threat, Thielen's in the slot moving all over the formation, Jalen Coker's a really nice depth piece to have as well, then you start to see it round into shape with a top talent in there. But I don't know that there's a whole lot of guys in the pro market that'll make them significantly better. There's a couple of guys I could see fitting in as, wide receiver 3 or 4 amongst that crew you just mentioned, but I think the bigger hope is that Legette and Coker just continue to develop, especially Legette, kind of derailed by some injuries, some nagging injuries all throughout the year, had some drop issues, right? Really looked like he was trying to get used to life in the NFL and life as a route runner and trying to catch balls through tight windows. So I think certainly Legette taking a much bigger step with a full year of Bryce Young, hopefully playing the way he did down the stretch, would really help him a lot.
Yeah. Amari Cooper's probably the name that sticks out to me the most. Some people in the chat are saying, if Brandon Ayuk is obviously available, you'd want to get in on those conversations. I agree. Tyreek Hill talked about being unhappy and it maybe being his last year in Miami. I know he's walked that back since, but are you reaching out about Tyreek Hill potentially? I thought that they were going to be in on the DK Metcalf market, and maybe they were, but the price tag plus what he ended up getting as in a contract from the Pittsburgh Steelers, I can understand that. Maybe, I guess if we're sticking with the Steelers, if George Pickens becomes available, like perhaps you would take a flyer on him if it wouldn't cost too much, like if it just cost you a 3rd-round pick, because does Carolina have a 3rd rounder? I can't remember.
So I was going to pose a question. So they have picks 57 and 74, and I'm wondering, Metcalf got the 52nd overall pick from Pittsburgh. Would you give up 57 straight up for Brandon Ayuk?
Oh, for Ayuk?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I thought you were going to say Pickens, and I'm like sort of in between with Pickens.
No, I might give up 74 for Pickens, or maybe like some sort of other package with multiple picks. But I would take Ayuk over Pickens also, and I think it fits their needs better as a guy who's an elite route runner. 57 straight up for Ayuk in the same manner as the Steelers gave up for Metcalf. Do we think who would say no to that, Carolina or San Francisco?
Well, what was Brandon Ayuk's injury? Didn't he tear his ACL? Isn't he coming off an ACL injury?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, because it's he tore his ACL and his MCL. So that's kind of tough, right? Because he's making $30 million a year on average. He's 27. He just signed that deal. Would
you be more inclined to give up then like a 3 and a 5?
Yeah, no, if I don't have to give up a second, like I'd give up a third for sure. He's $20 million against the salary. No, he's $10 million on the salary cap this year, but then all of the guaranteed money on his deal is actually gone after this season. But then his cap number shoots up because it's a very backloaded contract, it appears. But he'll be 30 once that contract is up. Can you sort of move the money around and make it a little bit easier? I would not pay. I know I said yes to a second rounder for Brandon Ayuk, sort of right off the bat because it makes a lot of sense, but I don't love that you're paying a second rounder and then having to take on that contract for a guy that's coming off a knee injury. So I would not be doing that. It would have to be a little bit later, a little bit less of a price in my opinion, just because that's a lot to give up for a guy who is coming off of an ACL tear. So yeah, so those are some thoughts on Brandon Ayuk and just the Panthers overall. It feels like they're sort of more in on the draft now at this point. Maybe they were in on those wide receiver conversations. I don't know if they're addressing their wide receiver one needs before they get to the draft, but we'll see. I mean, Tetairoa McMillan could absolutely be an option for them. And, a lot of people are saying like, oh, I saw a comment in the chat when we were chatting about this a little bit earlier. Oh, Tetairoa McMillan, he can do everything but run. He's got a ton of yards after catch. I don't know. I feel like the conversations that we're having with Tetairoa McMillan are very strange. His in-game athleticism scores are still relatively high over the last couple of seasons. Like, I don't think Tetairoa McMillan's running like a 4.8 or something like some people think that he is. He's actually a pretty good athlete. He does not move like your normal big receiver.
No, I think I'm pretty sure the stat Max keeps throwing out there is that he was second behind Luther Burden in missed tackles forced this season. This is not no. Look, I know there's a lot of big receivers that in the Power 4 he was second behind Luther Burden in missed tackles forced, which is crazy. I know there's a lot of, he's 6'5", so we just assume he can't separate. No, this kid's this is a different level. He does not, for a year and a half I've said this, he does not move like a normal 6'5" and 215 receiver. That's a different animal. Watch him run routes over the middle of the field, those in cuts, and the way he explodes after he catches the football. There's a reason that we believe he should be a top 8, top 10 pick, because he's not. Tetairoa McMillan's not normal. That's pretty much the best way I can put it. That is not your usual fourth round 6'5" jump ball guy who runs a 4.7. He didn't run it. I don't even think did he go to the combine? I don't even know if he went to the combine, but I would bet money at the McMillan.
Oh, wait.
Or he didn't do any of the drills, I don't think.
No. He didn't do any of the drills, and I don't think I think he said that he's not doing any of them at his pro day either, which is basically the same exact thing that Drake London did. And I keep telling people, like, I even think that Tet's got more juice than Drake London has, and London's doing all right in the NFL. So I think there's a lot of people who are just overthinking Tetairoa McMillan. That's my thoughts. But let's move on. We've been talking about the Carolina Panthers for a while. Shout out to Super Chat. Appreciate you guys giving us that. Let's go on to another contender. We talked about the Buffalo Bills. We talked about the Detroit Lions. What about the Baltimore Ravens? A lot of people want to know about the Ravens, specifically them signing DeAndre Hopkins. Is he going to give them anything? What is left in the tank here for DeAndre Hopkins? Does this signing mean anything? It's a 1-year, $5 million deal. He didn't exactly have the takeover wide receiver one type of role that some people believe that he could have when he went over to the Kansas City Chiefs. But they don't really need that from him in Baltimore. Does he still have enough to be the complementary piece that makes a difference there with Baltimore's team?
Yeah, I think so. I think he can be a complementary piece, a guy who's still a savvy route runner, can still win one-on-one in the drop-back game especially. I think what happened towards the end in Kansas City is as they got into the later weeks of the season, into their playoff run, they really started to emphasize yards after catch more, and that's really the part that Hopkins doesn't give you as much as he used to. He's not as explosive with the ball in his hands. He's a good route runner. He's a chain mover. He's a good weapon in the red zone. He knows how to get himself open, but there's a little bit of that explosiveness that's gone, and you can tell that after the catch. So he was kind of phased out of Kansas City's offense, not really due to a lack of effectiveness, because he was solid for several weeks at the beginning when they first traded for him, but more as a philosophical approach of how they were going about their offense, getting Xavier Worthy more involved in the screen game, right? Getting some other guys involved underneath as that Chiefs offense got more and more conservative. Travis Kelce got involved more in the playoffs, obviously, but I think Hopkins can still be effective on this team, right? I think when you talk about having Bateman on the outside, having Hopkins as an X that can still get open one-on-one, and then to me, the effect that it can have of getting out of some of those two tight end sets that they're living in, because even right. I think about their last drive of the season, and that and they went down and scored, and then obviously Mark Andrews dropped a 2-point conversion. But even that drive, they were still in 12 personnel the whole way. They had Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely both on the field in 2-minute situations. I don't think there's another team in football that would sit in 12 personnel in a 2-minute situation, right? And I'm not saying anything against Andrews or Likely. They're both fantastic football players, but the need and to be able to diversify your offense, diversify the personnel, I think Hopkins can bring that, because now you have, let's say, an 11 personnel package with still a really good receiving threat at tight end in Andrews or Likely, where, again, Hopkins outside, Bateman outside, and Zay Flowers is the key to me to their offense. And they didn't have Zay Flowers in that game either, where you go, he can move all around the formation and do anything you want. He's fast enough to get vertical. He's great with the ball in his hands. He's getting to be a sharper route runner here as time goes on. He's a legitimate, to me, number one wide receiver. It's just the size might not say that to some other people. I think what Hopkins is able to do, if he's able to still get open one-on-one, to open up the formations and open up the schemes in the passing game for Flowers, that's what you're talking about when you want a complementary piece like that. As long as he can still be a threat 4 or 5 times a game to get open one-on-one, then I think the Ravens made a really good move.
No, I agree. He doesn't have to be the DeAndre Hopkins that he was with the Texans for this to be worth it for the Ravens. It's more about flexibility, because they also have Tylan Wallace and Nelson Aguilar. Both of those guys are unrestricted free agents. They're currently sitting out there as free agents, and so you had to bring something back. They have Tez Walker as well, but he's just a vertical threat. Hasn't really proven otherwise. Obviously, Rashad Bateman was able to have a good year last year, and we know that they build their passing attack around the tight ends and Zay Flowers. But to your point, if Hopkins, there are some people who, in the chat, I understand this, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. They're saying, oh, Hopkins is past his prime. He's not what he used to be. It's true. But if the name DeAndre Hopkins and the presence of DeAndre Hopkins still makes a defense go, we still can't leave that guy open. We still have to know where DeAndre is at all times, because even though he doesn't have the speed that he used to, he still has the savviness, and he's still pretty good at contested catch situations. As long as you're able to keep the defense honest with his presence on the field, like you said, that does give you that flexibility. So I actually do like that signing for the Ravens. It doesn't have to be the DeAndre Hopkins of old for that to be worth it for them. Let's talk about the Miami Dolphins next. We've had a couple of people in the chat who want our thoughts on the Dolphins, because it's not really a star-studded free agency haul for Miami here, but it's one that I think they did a pretty good job supplementing a lot of their needs with not a lot of cash to work with. James Daniels, he was their big signing, who gets to step in at guard, which I like for them. They signed Zach Wilson, so they got a decent backup quarterback option. We touched on that a little bit before. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, I actually love that signing. Westbrook-Ikhine is somebody who, he can block for you. He's a contested catch type of a dude. Obviously somebody who's very comfortable in the red zone and getting into the end zone with his, 8-week-in-a-row touchdown streak when he was with the Titans last year. And so I love the fact that he is different, because it felt as though Miami was really leaning into just one dimension of what they really wanted to do over the last couple of years, and that was speed, right? It was speed at the wide receiver position. It was speed at the running back position. And you can want to be a faster football team. There's no problem with that. They combine that with a zone blocking strategy, especially outside zone, and that sort of got a little bit tricky for them last year when they started to lose some key players in their offensive line, and they went, no, it's all good. We got the team speed to make up for it. We don't have to address the offensive line as much as we really believe. So, Robert Hunt's out of there, and bringing Aaron Brewer, but they're kind of having some musical chairs along the offensive line. It doesn't help that Teron Armstead was hurt a lot last season. But this offseason, I feel like they are being more real about what you need to be or the floor that your team has to have in order to just win week in and week out in this league to maximize that speed that you had at those other positions. So I like the Melifonwu signing, little 1 year, $4 million deal. Brought back Quinn Bell, brought back Elijah Campbell, signed Ashton Davis as well to play one of those safety spots. What did you think of Miami? It was more of a quiet offseason. It wasn't a super flashy free agency period, but your thoughts on the moves that they made?
I think certainly the most interesting move is James Daniels, right? And if he can come back healthy off of, I believe, was it a torn Achilles for him this past year in Pittsburgh? Pretty sure it was.
I cannot remember what it was, but he only played like 2 games, and it was a bummer because he graded really well through those first 2 games.
I think if he's healthy, he can fit in there, especially with Robert Jones leaving at left guard. I think that's a really good spot for him to play, here in Miami. And if something were to happen to Brewers, say injury-wise, Daniels could move into center. But no, I think you still look at in the trenches, the offensive and the defensive lines being the biggest concerns. And obviously, look, with their cap situation, they had to go bargain shopping, right? I think they've done a nice job of it here. James Daniels, Terrell Dodson's ranked 3rd among all linebackers and coverage grade in each of the past 2 seasons. So I think he's a really good role player to have on defense. Westbrook Akine is a more classic route runner. I know they're always looking for yards after catch, but he can really help them in the slot, moving around the formation and freeing up maybe even a guy like Malik Washington to get into more of a gadget role, right? So I think they're not going to have a problem with weapons. We know they don't have a problem with weapons. And then, honestly, I think an interesting part of this, because of so many of Tua's injuries over the years, I think Zach Wilson's got kind of an interesting role here. When you're playing behind Tua, you're probably expecting to make a few starts during the season with his concussion history, with some other injuries that he's had. So I think for them to take the chance on Wilson, this past year it was Tyler Huntley. Before that, it was Mike White. Before that, it was Ryan Fitzpatrick. This is going to be a theme, and I think if they're trusting Wilson enough after a year with Sean Payton in Denver, I got to think if you're signing Zach Wilson and you're the Miami Dolphins, knowing Tua's injury history, you're trusting him to make 3 or 4 starts this season, because those are just the facts. Has he gotten through a 17-game season at any point, and maybe once in his career? I don't know that he's played all 17 games a single time in his career. So
it's a good thing to look up.
It's
a good thing to look up on the fly. Hold on, give me a second.
So
hopefully I'll be able to see it. He did. He played 17 games in 2023.
Okay, so one time he did. The overwhelming likelihood, though, is you're talking about once in 5 seasons. You're not going to get all 17 games out of Tua, right? So even the Zach Wilson signing is very interesting to me, and I think with all those weapons, and if he's protected, it's a system with his mobility that could fit him a little better than what he's played in the past. But either way, look, the Dolphins, they had to make value signings. I think they've made a handful of good ones. They have a hard time with losing stars and yet still not having a ton of cap room to work with, right? Christian Wilkins last year, Javon Holland this year. You fill in with Melifonwu and Ashton Davis. Neither of them are anything close to Javon Holland, but they're just trying to fill this thing out and patch it together. But the offensive line is still the big concern for me, especially that left tackle spot.
Yeah, I was going to ask, does this change anything that they've done, even though there are some minor moves, complementary moves? Does getting James Daniels, does that change your idea on the offensive line? I don't think it does, especially with them saying at the Combine they're operating as if Teron Armstead is not with this team next year. If he comes back, great. They have Patrick Paul, who they could put into one of those offensive tackle spots. But again, if Kelvin Banks Jr. is on the board there at number 13, it's going to be really hard for me to say that they should pass up on him, because I think that he would be perfect for what they need to build moving forward. So that's our thoughts with Miami. No, I definitely wouldn't call Miami losers. A little bit more quiet, sure, but I think it not every team has the ability to be super loud and own the headlines in free agency. Rami, I see your super chat. We're getting to that right here. Is John Schneider on the hot seat if Seattle doesn't sign any top-tier interior offensive linemen? Because what's the point of moving off of DK and Geno if the cap isn't spent? Shout out, Rami. Appreciate the super chat and getting us to talk about the Seahawks here. So, yeah, obviously some big moves in Seattle with them moving on from Geno Smith, with them moving on from DK Metcalf, but not just Metcalf either. Tyler Lockett no longer on the team as well. They had some big-time interior offensive line issues, and they have not changed that at all whatsoever. Olu Oluwatimi is still their projected center. They do have Christian Haynes, who I think can develop into a good starting guard for them, but we haven't seen that yet for them. It's then Anthony Bradford. It's Satoa Lumea. It's just not a lot to get super excited about in the interior, and this was such an issue for them before that how are you bringing in Sam Darnold, because they brought in Sam Darnold, and think, no, we'll be good to go with this interior offensive line. I know the interior offensive line was like kind of an issue for Minnesota as well. Clint Kubiak kind of runs that same offensive system, so maybe they can mitigate that in a little bit of the ways that Minnesota did last year. But yeah, I thought that Seattle would be a lot more aggressive for an interior offensive lineman somewhere in free agency. Bring something in.
What do you
think about this? Do you think that Schneider? I don't know if Schneider's on the hot seat per se, but when you make big moves like this, when you trade roster cornerstones, there's no doubt about it that all eyes are on you. And you really have to make the most of these big swings. So I wouldn't say the hot seat, but what do you think about that current situation and then just them addressing the interior offensive line potentially moving forward?
Well, they certainly are going to have to execute when it comes to fixing that and filling out now this wide receiver core that's basically just Jackson Smith and Jigba and nothing else, right? But they've got 5 of the top 92 picks in this draft. I would fully expect it's possible that 2 of those picks could be interior offensive linemen. I look at somebody like Gray Zabel from North Dakota State who could really help him out a lot. You mentioned, I think, a very important name, and that's Christian Haynes, right? And I know Sato Lamea at the end of the year was starting at right guard, and in theory he's a fit for Clint Kubiak's run schemes, but I just don't know that he can pass protect at an NFL level. I felt like last year when they drafted Christian Haynes, I thought that was a very good draft pick last year, I believe in the 3rd round, and he fits even better in with Clint Kubiak's zone schemes, right? He did that a lot at UConn. It was very natural for him. He's very athletic, and I think a better pass protection ceiling than Lamea, so I think Haynes could become an important part. Oluwatimi, like you mentioned, experienced at center, but I still think it's going to be a target area for them in the first 2 days of this draft, right? When you talk again about maybe a Donovan Jackson, maybe a Gray Zabel, maybe they get into, one of these tackle converts if it's somebody like Jonas Savayanea and they move him inside, right? I think they just have to raise the floor on it because right now you look at them and you go, that's probably the worst interior offensive line in the NFL, and it's what cost them a postseason spot, right? They were in line to make the playoffs, and then they had injuries on the inside there, and they just could not piece it together, and even the one starter that was still there now, Laken Tomlinson, he's moved on to Houston as well. So kind of like the Bears a little bit, the way they began their offseason with trying to find who the 3 viable starters there on the inside are. If they do find that, or if they find even 1 or 2 in free agency still to value, I know Tevin Jenkins has been linked to them, at least in conversations. Do we
think he fits? Like somebody in the chat also was saying Mekhi Becton, and like I don't know if either of those guys
I would
fit.
I would go. I think Jenkins would stand a better chance. He's a good athlete. I think I wouldn't go with Becton. I think Becton's got to be in a downhill kind of situation like he was in Philly. I think there are some fits out there for Becton, but not Seattle. I think Jenkins could fit. The problem with Jenkins is you're dealing with a unit that already had a bunch of injuries last year, and Jenkins is one of the most oft-injured interior offensive linemen in the league, right? He's another guy. He's a hard time getting through 17 games, got a history of back problems and things like that. So I think Jenkins, if you could guarantee me he would play 17 games, yeah, I would sign him. I would sign him and start him at left guard immediately. But that's the thing you have to take into account is the availability, and that's probably why Jenkins has taken longer to sign than a lot of these other guards, right? I know Will Fries had the injury, but that seems to be more of a one-time thing that teams are trusting more so than Jenkins, who has had injury issues going all the way back to Oklahoma State, right? So I think, again, 5 picks in the top 100, they're going to take at least 1 interior offensive lineman, and we know they're going to take at least 1 wide receiver, and I think that's going to be the debate at pick number 18. Is it wide receiver? Do they reach for interior offensive line? How do they go about this? Do they have enough ammo maybe to trade up higher in the second round now that they're picking 50 and 52? I mean, I think there's a lot of options when they're looking for starting caliber players, especially in the offensive line and at wide receiver. You might see them maneuver around on draft day a little bit to get the guys that they want.
Yeah, and this is actually an exciting draft that could be coming up here for the Seattle Seahawks because they pick at 18 in the first round, and then it's those 2 second-round picks, 50 and 52. They have 2 third-rounders, 82 and 92. Then they have a 4th-round comp pick, 2 fifth-round comp picks, a 6th-round pick, and then a 7th-round pick. So they've got a lot of draft capital here, and I look at Jared Wilson, the center from Georgia, and it's hard to not think that he's going to be a Seattle Seahawk, man. Well, I think that if Jared Wilson is available for them, which I think he should be.
Well, should we experiment? Do you want to do a 3-round Seattle mock draft right now? Get 5 picks and 3 rounds in. That's some fun if you wanted to. We could project this out right now. We need O-linemen. We need wide receivers. See how it plays.
All right, okay. If they could pull up the simulator, we'll just do. I just want to do the first 2 rounds.
2 rounds, all right. The first 3
I
picks.
just want to do the first 2 rounds. Okay, pick the Seahawks. All right, yeah. Let's just do the first 2 rounds. We'll do this really quick. I don't want it to be as long as it was before, but I want to, put the free agency to the test. All right, start the draft. Number 18.
Is it Luther Burden?
Oh,
going that route?
I like that.
Go Luther Burden first and figure out the offensive lineman round 2?
Yeah. Let's go Luther Burden here. Go Luther Burden at 18. Now, do we think that he's too much of a? Do you think that he could play more than the slot? Because then I think that brings this into.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got Smith and Jigba. I think Burden, honestly, the way you can move him around, I think a little bit like Zay Flowers. I think he could work from anywhere in the formation.
Okay, all right.
And with the speed that he has, and this is something I'm going to get into later in the week, Clint Kubiak wants to take deep shots, especially off of play action, and Burden's got the speed that you want to get downfield like that.
I agree. Okay, let's go Luther Burden at 18. Let's do Burden at 18. And then let's get into interior offensive line.
Did I miss out? Let's see. Did I miss out on Donovan Jackson, or is he here?
Yeah, I think Donovan Jackson's probably going to be gone. Can we go to guard? Can we see guard really quick? Because one of these picks is going to be a center.
Or he's listed under tackle as well. Actually, we might want to put tackle in there also.
Who is?
Jackson.
Oh, yeah. No. He's gone. I knew that he would be gone.
Okay, so he's gone. See, this is a spot now, and obviously we're not going to do it here, where I would have thought about if they feel like Gray Zabel is or Donovan Jackson is like 10 picks above their range, then I would think about, okay, these are guys that we would get into trading up for in this second round.
Who are the edge rushers that are left? Because I feel like they could use edge rusher as well.
That could be a realistic. Tuimoloau makes some, or Sawyer, either one.
Dude, I think Swinson's better.
Swinson.
I think Swinson's awesome.
I need to do the deep dive on Swinson, but if you feel like Swinson's better than either of them, I mean, I get it.
Oh, well, so we have not updated the draft yet because the Steelers still have pick 52.
Oh, okay, that's a thing. Well, either way, we're just talking options. So if there is, but even then, if you stay here and it's still an if you don't have an interior offensive lineman in your range, you still have 52, you still have 82, you still have 92.
Yeah.
You could go edge
rusher.
Take
Braden Swinson, because I don't want to spend too much time on the mock draft because people are here to talk about free agency.
Well, the idea is more than the specific names. You could go edge rusher and then go, okay, round 3, Tate Ratledge, Jared Wilson, something on the inside. The day 2 is going to be the sweet spot, especially with them having 4 picks, for them getting interior offensive linemen, maybe multiple of them, right? But it would not shock me that gap between 18 and 50. They're loaded up now, especially. I forget, are you allowed to trade comp picks or no? Is that a thing that you can't trade them?
No, you could trade comp picks.
I couldn't remember. I thought I heard a thing one time where you couldn't. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's baseball I'm thinking of. I have no idea. But
Walt doesn't like Braden Swinson. He hasn't watched yet. Understandable.
I do need to do the deep dive on Swinson. I've been watching more edge rushers this week. I got to get in there.
Good.
But for sure. But that's the idea: is that wide receiver, edge, interior offensive line. They could be done in any order. And when you have 5 picks in the first 100, well, then you're on to something. You can do it in any order that you want to.
Steve is saying that you'd rather have Matthew Golden over Luther Burden. I suppose that would be on the table as well at number 18 if you like Matthew Golden a little bit better. So, in my opinion, that draft that we just did, I would say for the Seahawks, one of those wide receivers, so Luther Burden or Matthew Golden there at number 18. Pick one of the edge rushers. JT Tuimoloau, Braden Swinson. If you're that high on Kyle Kennard, I'm not quite as high on him as the other guys, but I'd take Braden Swinson there. And then at 52, genuinely, I'd take Jared Wilson from Georgia. I think he is awesome. I think he's perfect for what they need to do. And then at that point, 2 out of the 3 spots along your interior offensive line are different than they were last year. And one of the 3 guys that you had the year prior, you let them battle it out for that last guard spot. So you've got Jared Wilson to start for you at center. You have Christian Haynes at one of the right guard spots. And then you feel pretty good about whoever's going to win that competition for the other guard need. I think it would be left guard then at that point. But then you got a pass rusher. Then you got a wide receiver. Not bad. Not bad. See? You guys can do that yourself by going over to PFF.com, getting yourself a PFF Plus subscription, run as many rounds, as many mock drafts as you want. So post-free agency, it's a really fun time to be able to do that. We're updating the draft order once it gets official. So I believe that when the new league year turns around, we will be able to have all of that settled and all of the picks are able to go to their certain spots. And once it becomes official with the league, then we will obviously have the order updated there in the MDS. Okay. What's the other team that we got to hit on? Dude, how are the Saints doing this, by the way?
Voodoo New Orleans Magic. I have no idea. Actually, I don't know where they're getting this money
like
from.
Them signing Justin Reed. I like them bringing back Juwan Johnson. Those two moves that New Orleans made, but I don't know how they're doing it. I don't know where the cap's coming from.
I think
Justin Reed's a great signing for them, though. Him and Tyrann Mathieu, I think, are a great safety.
Yeah, they've had it going really well at safety. Before it was Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May, and then Jordan Howden was playing pretty well. But to get Justin Reed in there as another leader, look, that secondary, they got some young cornerback talent. You've got Reed and Mathieu on the back end. It's not really the concern for me. I would argue that's the strongest part of their team right now, right? I think the question is, okay, they felt like they got good production out of Chase Young last year. That's one edge player. But again, you've got an aging front seven that they really need to, I think, address in this draft, right? Bryan Bresee is really not hitting his first 2 years. Cam Jordan's obviously getting older. Demario Davis, I think that was one restructure that cleared some money for them, but he's getting older. Eventually, you're going to have to find another middle linebacker, right? I believe they re-signed Pete Werner for another year. So I think offensive and defensive lines, we've been talking about it all offseason. That's going to be the focus in this draft. They have to get better in the trenches, whether it be to compete in 2025 or beyond. I think Kellen Moore knows, obviously, from just winning a Super Bowl in Philadelphia, the trenches are the most important part, right? And they're going to work on a quarterback eventually. Derek Carr is going to be their starter for at least this year, but I think this is a good time now. Secondary's filled. Got your tight end back in Juwan Johnson. You don't have a ton of money to work with. Offensive line, defensive line, figure out the foundation with younger players. I think especially on the defensive line that was such a mess last year.
Yeah. I'd love to have the San Francisco 49ers conversation right now. Oh, actually, Walt's saying Ted at number 9 to the New Orleans Saints, potentially. So it's a really good wide receiver trio in theory.
I get it.
One of those guys gets traded.
But if you can't block, you can't block.
Yeah, but Walt is saying that it's a deep interior defensive line and offensive line draft, so you might be able to get one of those guys, because I haven't looked at how many picks we have here for New Orleans. I don't think they traded any. So first, second, third, they got an extra third-round pick from Washington. They have 2 fourths and then a 6th. So they got some decent capital to work with.
I think for me, the ideal pick, if he fell to them, and I probably will say this about 4 or 5 teams, I think if Mason Graham fell to them at 9, that's where I'm going.
They need an impact player on the defensive line.
Yeah, it hasn't worked with Bryan Bresee. A lot of the other guys are getting older. I mean, your main edge player is now really, I know Cam Jordan is still there, and obviously he's one of the captains, but it's really Carl Granderson and Chase Young. So I don't know if there will be as much urgency with this Chase Young contract as to take an edge player. I think if Mason Graham fell to that spot, you're talking about a player that could make a huge impact for him, especially in run defense. He was the highest graded run defensive tackle in the league, in the country, I should say, last year at Michigan. I think that would be the ideal move. If not, then I think we talk about somebody like Armand Membu to take over that right tackle spot from Trevor Penning.
All right, really quick, just because somebody sent this in the chat. I just looked this up. Georgia had their pro day today. Mykel Williams 40-yard dash times. You ready for it?
Go for it.
4.73 and 4.81.
Honestly,
for Mykel Williams.
Honestly, I think that tracks.
It does.
I don't think.
Dude,
he's not. He's not that
trying to tell people.
He's not that explosive.
All year.
He's not that explosive off the ball. Like, I think that tracks, actually. Honestly, I really think when you're talking about, we've talked about this before, and it's kind of, I don't want to say a dying role, but a role that's not used as much. 20 years ago, he'd be a top 5 pick because you have that 3-4 defensive end, that 5 technique. He would be perfect for that role, but it's just not a role that's used all that often as teams only get into 5 defensive lineman sets in certain situations against certain personnel groupings. I think that tracks.
So I just looked it up. For edge rushers since 2011, 4.73 is 67th percentile, so it's not terrible. And then 4.81 would be 47th percentile. So he's right around like a 50th percentile dude when it comes to the 40-yard draft and or the 40-yard dash, excuse me. Somebody asked, do we know the 10-yard split? I don't have the 10-yard splits in front of me. I'm not sure. I don't have all that information in front of me, guys. Somebody had just thrown that out there about Walker. I wanted to confirm that before I talked about it because he has been sort of a polarizing dude. When we do mock drafts here on this show, we often have Mykel Williams around the top 20, a lot of times like in the 20s when we do mock drafts, and there's a lot of other people who could have him, number 9 overall to the Saints, number 8 overall to the Panthers, and he's in consideration in the top 10. We've never really been there. Even though I like him as a player, I didn't think that he was as good as some of those other guys. So interesting. Just wanted to kind of throw that out there and give us a little Little change up here from the free agency talk is we're blending free agency and the NFL draft here on the show. Hey, I do want to talk about the Niners because this is a contending team that has some big changes, and it's just going to be a different looking 49ers team moving forward. Before we get to that, all the parents out there, what does your kid's success look like to you? You know, whether it's them traveling the world, it's having a great job that they love, maybe it's just them being comfortable, whatever their dreams are, big or small, Fabric by Gerber Life can help them achieve that, and you can help them achieve that as well. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids cannot invest while they're minors, but this kids investment account specifically allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. Whole thing's online. Setting up an account could just take you as little as 5 minutes, and then you can just manage everything right from your phone. Starts with just $20, no contribution limits to it. It's got tax advantages. Funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000. Plus, there's no commission fees, just a low, flat monthly maintenance fee for it. The funds can be used for basically anything. When they're kids, it's tuition, it's tutors, it's sporting events, it's music classes, things like that. When they're a little bit older, maybe it's helping them start a business, buy a first house, get a first car, whatever that is. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family and start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. It's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. Oh, Jason in the chat saying a lot of smoke on Hendrickson to the Atlanta Falcons.
Oh, that would be huge. That
Interesting.
That would be so massive if they actually pulled that off. We'll see. We'll see if there's smoke, there's fire. I know there's been several teams linked to him, but if he ever went to Atlanta, you'd really be talking about some progress made there in their pass rush.
Daniel asking, Fabric help get the Saints out of cap hell by chance? I wouldn't put it against them. Great financial institution. They might be able to. Got to call them up. New Orleans Saints. Meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. There you go.
If any team needs it.
Let's talk about the Niners. The Niners are a team that over the last week, well, a little bit longer, I suppose. They've lost Deebo Samuel. They've lost Aaron Banks. They've lost Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga. Am I missing anybody else? Kyle Juszczyk.
Kyle Juszczyk. And we're always hearing rumors about
Malik Collins.
Jalen Moore, just throwing it out there. He started several games for him last year.
Javon Hargrave, Leonard Floyd. A lot of these players are gone. Now they signed DeMarcus Robinson. Get it great. Signed Patrick Taylor. They got him on a one-year deal. Signed Luke Farrell, so they're getting another tight end in there. But this is a new-look Niners team. The winning window that the Niners had with that current roster construction over the last 2 or 3 years is no longer there. And they weren't able to get a Super Bowl out of it. And so now they've got to turn the page a little bit. And a big reason why they have to turn the page is because of Brock Purdy. That extension's coming up. Sounds like they're going to sign him to a pretty big deal. And these are just the roster decisions that you have to make. I think that when people looked at the Niners, their roster was so stacked because of what they were able to do and the flexibility that they could have without having a franchise caliber quarterback on a franchise caliber contract. Now you're about to, and you just have to operate under different modes, different parameters, different rules. What do you think about the 49ers, the moves that they have made, the guys that aren't on the roster anymore, and then what this Brock Purdy decision could mean for this team moving forward?
I think this very much could be a transition year where obviously they're still going to be a pretty good team because they have a lot of talent, but I think you're preparing for a handful of things. One, you just mentioned it with Brock Purdy. He won't be the highest paid quarterback in the league, but he's going to get a large amount of money to be their quarterback. I think John Lynch has made that very clear. They're just working out the exact number. But you're preparing for a future very, very soon here, I would think, without Trent Williams, possibly without Christian McCaffrey, especially with the injury questions that they've had. Not necessarily this year, but he's going into an age 29 season after he hardly played last year due to a lot of leg injuries, right? So I think you've got now a more top-heavy team than you used to have, right? You're going to have Purdy getting paid. You've got McCaffrey and Trent Williams. Brandon Ayuk's getting paid. Nick Bosa's getting paid. He's one of the highest-paid defensive ends in the league. So I think what it's going to be this year, some development for some younger guys, figuring out where they're at in the trenches around Bosa or even around Trent Williams, because the rest of that offensive line, other than Dominic Puni, I think still needs some work at least 3 of those spots. You mentioned Aaron Banks leaving. He was their starting left guard the last few years. I look at them in this draft, a team now with all the comp selections through with 12 draft picks, And I mean, I know 12 players is a lot, but it feels like they could just keep throwing darts at certain positions trying to find talent. You look at linebacker. They need somebody now next to Fred Warner. They need somebody next to Jair Brown at safety. Maybe that's Malik Mustafa, right? They lost Tavarius Ward at corner. I was going through this roster even last night, and I'm like, you could justify them taking almost anything with their first handful of selections and go, yeah, they need something there except maybe wide receiver. I mean, I think you're looking at if they took a Mason Graham at D tackle, okay. If they took Jahdae Barron at corner, yeah, that makes sense. If they took an offensive lineman, a Kelvin Banks, it makes sense. I think in the sense of, like, we've talked about other teams that have flexibility because they have most of the spots filled out, right, and they can take best player available. This is a situation where the Niners need best player available because they need players. I mean, they're extremely top-heavy right now when you look at their roster, and it's hard with that lack of depth to win week in and week out.
I think it could go a lot of ways in the draft. And I think that it could end up working out for them, but there's no doubt about it. John Lynch is going to have his work cut out for them because they have a ton of picks, if I remember correctly.
12 picks right now.
Yeah, 12 picks right now is a lot. And they're just going to have to reshape that roster, right? It's just going to be all about, you've got to get those young guys. To be honest with you, you got to get guys that are going to be able to punch above your weight class. You got to have 4th and 5th rounders that kind of play like they should have been day 2 guys. You got to get a couple of day 2 guys that probably should have been in consideration for the first round. Like, you've just got to be able to find these guys that fit your scheme and your team so well that they play above their draft position. That's, I think, what the 49ers are going to need if they want to slingshot this winning window really quickly. Zach, ZZ Top, shout out, gave us a super chat as well. Which under-the-radar free agent moves do you think will have the biggest positive impact based on fit and PFF grades/data? I feel like your guy, Drew Dalman's got to be the first one that you're bringing up to the table, right? Because of how great he was in that zone blocking scheme with the Atlanta Falcons, how it feels like they're sort of putting together that type of an offensive line to not only be versatile, but also be able to stretch the field in those mid and outside zone plays like it felt like the Bears weren't able to do as effectively over the last couple of years. And so is Dalman that favorite fit when it comes to just overall scheme and PFF data from you?
Yeah, that's number one for me. When you look at Ben Johnson with the Lions last year, ran the fourth highest rate of outside zone in the NFL. Atlanta was also in that top 4. Drew Dalman has really mastered that system and his responsibilities, what he needs to do at center. I think he's the absolute perfect fit. And I know there was arguments about, okay, they could draft Will Campbell, they could draft somebody on day 2 to play center, but Johnson wanted this specific player. Not only was he the best center on the market, but he was the best center for this scheme on the market. Over the last 3 years, Trevor, among all centers, okay, Dalman had the second highest outside zone run blocking grade. The only player ahead of him, of course, is Frank Ragnow, who was with the Lions, and Ben Johnson. So I think you're talking about somebody he sees that could carry the same responsibilities that Ragnow did, and obviously they fixed up their pass protection, getting Joe Thuney. Jonah Jackson's a guy with plenty of experience under Ben Johnson when he was in Detroit. I think overall the Bears have done a perfect job of fixing this interior, their offensive line, but for me the cherry on top is Dalman. It's my favorite signing out of any team has made this offseason.
Yeah, I think that I'll stick with 2 corners come to mind when I saw that question right off the bat. Paulson Adebo is one of them going to the New York Giants. I think that he is perfect for exactly what the New York Giants needed at outside corner. They needed somebody who could be able to play that outside spot with a lot of confidence. And when you look at the last 2 years, last year wasn't as great for Adebo. Obviously, he had the injury to him as well. But when you look at the last 2 years and looking at percentiles for guys who are in the NFL, in single coverage situations, he was 85th percentile in terms of his coverage grade. And then when you look at his outside cornerback reps specifically, he was 91st percentile in the NFL in coverage grade, which you love. He's also really aggressive. This is a defense that needs to get their hands on the football. They need to create more turnovers. And he was 97th percentile in terms of forced incompletion at 19.3%. So him playing on the outside, allowing Deonte Banks to play on the other, and letting Drew Phillips thrive after a really great rookie year in the slot, to me now sort of completes what you would want there along that secondary group. And then, I'll add on Javon Holland to that, who I think has done a lot of really great work as a single high safety. We mentioned this before. So now he gets to play that coverage free safety role. And Tyler Nubin, the guy that they drafted last year, gets to play more of exactly what he was when he was at Minnesota. When he was in those strong safety, robber roll situations where he could really just look over the middle of the field, he had a ton of production on the ball. He had a lot of interceptions, and he was just a really high impact player. So those are two signings from the Giants. Secondary was a major issue for this team, and I really do feel as though the player scheme fit as well as the data backs up those guys being worth those contracts.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I love the Holland signing especially. This is the team that runs a lot of single high coverages under Shane Bowen. So I think Holland in that role can fill in what they lost this past year with Xavier McKinney, right? I mean, because it's exactly what they lost was that single high center fielder, that ball hawk whose speed can make up even for a corner's mistakes on the outside, and he can still force incompletions or even turn it into interceptions, right? I think Holland gives them that same dynamic that McKinney used to give them, and they were really missing last year, right? So it's going to ease up the pressure on those young cornerbacks, right? You've got an entire secondary that's going to be 26 years old or younger come opening day. I think it's a really good job that they've done of helping out those cornerbacks. Especially to me, Holland obviously is the big one. And I'm still surprised he wasn't the highest paid safety on the market this offseason. He kind of got the same contract as most of the other ones did, but I think the Giants got the best player out of all of them. If they were going to go fishing for a safety in that role, I think Holland's the right one.
Yeah, I feel like Charvarius Ward as well. His fit with the Indianapolis Colts, I think makes a ton of sense there, joining that Lou Anarumo defense. So that to me is another one that's a great scheme fit in my opinion. I like the Cam Bynum selection a little bit more than you do. I think I've got a little bit more faith that he could play that free safety role and really open things up in the strong safety spot. You feel like he's a little bit more of a box safety. I feel like he could play a little bit more deep, but I think that's just kind of where we disagree on that. We got another super chat here. Markel Fuller, shout out for the super chat. We appreciate it. How much better are the Patriots on defense? Also, is receiver a must-get now for them in the draft, or can Josh McDaniels get the best out of Polk and Baker? So let's start with the defense. A lot of key additions here on the defensive side of the football. Brought in Carlton Davis, brought in Robert Spillane, big splash with Milton Williams. Also brought in Harold Landry when he got released from the Titans, so he gets reunited with Mike Vrabel there. Your thoughts on the New England Patriots and what they've done on the defensive side of things?
I think you look at the way they filled out the units, because this wasn't that bad a defense last year. They had some injuries, and obviously, Christian Barmore and his health issue last year, that really set them back. But when you look at it all three levels, you've got Barmore and Milton Williams on the inside up front. You've got Keon White and Harold Landry off the edge. Look at their linebackers. Robert Spillane's one of the best run-defending linebackers, and you add him to Jelani Tavai, it's going to be a very tough time running on the New England Patriots when you describe what their front six, front seven is. And then you look at their secondary and filling in that second corner role. Jonathan Jones really struggled last year. If Carlton Davis is healthy, that's a really solid guy to have across from Christian Gonzalez. Marcus Jones in the slot is a good player too. So, I mean, you look at this defense, I don't think you want to mess around too much. They're going to be physical. They're going to stop the run. They've got a good set of corners. I think New England's defense, as long as their offense doesn't put them in bad situations, they could be really good. There's a lot of talent you're working with on this defense. When you're talking about picking up a great run stopper at linebacker, picking up a great pass rusher on the inside to go with Barmore, especially that front seven is something I'm looking at that could be a dangerous unit. But, yeah, I mean, it's the obvious with New England. I think you look at all of left tackle, wide receiver, and running back somewhere in the early rounds of this draft. I think all three of those needs are going to be checked. I mean, I don't know. Again, that fourth overall spot, it's hard to tell. Could it be Will Campbell? Could it be Travis Hunter? Could it be Teterow and McMillan? And if it is Travis Hunter, you have to assume there's a lean towards receiver with them going and getting Davis and already having Gonzalez. Maybe it's a part-time corner thing where he can help him. You've mentioned even a safety idea just with his ball skills, but I would assume if they're taking Travis Hunter, he's about to be their number one wide receiver. If not, and they're going receiver, then again, we talk about Teterow and McMillan, and again, Mike Vrabel making comments at the Combine about, I need a receiver for Drake who can haul in some throws that might be slightly off target, right? Having that catch radius. I mean, that's Ted at 6'5", making the acrobatic catches that he can make. So I think certainly the offensive side of the ball as a whole is going to be an option. And wide receiver, if it's not with the fourth overall pick, it's going to be looked at in the first few rounds because they did not get enough production out of Jalen Polk or Javon Baker last year.
And now going on to the other part of the question, he brings up, can McDaniels get the best out of Jalen Polk and Javon Baker? I don't know if this is just me being naive, but I liked both of these players in the draft last year, and that's, I think, what made their disappointing 2024 season so shocking. And, obviously that whole coaching staff is now gone. They've moved on from it. The front office sort of realized that was not a good decision. And when you don't have good coaches guiding these young rookies, sometimes that can be the case. And so for a great head coach like Mike Vrabel, who's putting together a really good coaching staff, obviously an experienced guy, and Josh McDaniels there as the offensive coordinator, I actually have faith that Javon Baker and Jalen Polk are going to be good. I do think that they are going to be contributing football players. Now, do I think that any of them are going to be wide receiver ones on this team? Okay, maybe not, but a whole lot better than what we saw from them in 2024. So I'm actually expecting a big bounce back year from both of those guys. I really am. I'm excited for the Patriots. I think their draft has the potential to be awesome. And I think this offseason, we went into this offseason, I said it before, I think this is the worst roster in the NFL. And then Mike Vrabel gets hired as their head coach. I love that move. I love what they have done in free agency. They've really brought a ton of talent onto the defensive side of the football. And then I think they're going to hit offense pretty heavy like we did for that Patriots mock draft that we did yesterday. So I think the Patriots are going to be a force, man. I think they're going to win a lot more games than people think they're going to. Hugh Wynn in the chat says, Chargers fan here. Talk me off the ledge. Fix the interior offensive line, please. Shout out the super chat. We appreciate you. What are they doing on the interior offensive line? What are the Chargers doing? Is it just a matter of, did Joe Ortiz just sort of have his targets on the interior offensive line and he fumbled it? These guys end up getting a lot more money than he thought that they were going to, because you got to think about this too. Teams do have a process, and you want these teams to have a process. You don't want them to get carried away with signings and carried away with money. Did they look at a handful of players? Were they involved in conversations with these guys? They just got outbid a little bit every single time, because that's sort of what it feels like. The Chargers had a lot of money to spend, so I don't think that they were just sitting here going, we got a lot of money to spend, but we're saving some money on the budget this year, so we're not going to do it, especially off a year that we had last year. What do you think about the Chargers? Do you think that that's where they are, and that's how they got into this spot? We've talked about a couple of other interior offensive linemen that could be options for them, but right now, Dalton, you lost Poona Ford. You lost some other guys on the defensive side of things. You didn't really address the offensive line the way that you wanted to. You got Najee Harris, I understand, but it doesn't feel like a win of a free agency week for the Chargers. What do you think about them?
No, I mean, look, there was some good things, obviously. I think keeping Khalil Mack, keeping Taylor Tart, those were two big moves on the defensive line. That was a big focus for me. I mean, we'll see, what happens with Asante Samuel Jr. out there at corner, too. But I think when you're talking about this offensive line, you're talking about pass protection. And I know so often we've gone with some of the Michigan connections. I think about the draft, and, we've talked about Kenneth Grant or Colson Loveland. They need weapons, and they do need weapons. But it also leaves the door open for somebody like a Tyler Booker, right, to come in there and just be a big solid pass protector on the inside at guard. And when you're looking at free agency, again, there's still some pretty solid guard options, especially in with what we're looking at here. When we talk about a Tevin Jenkins, I think Kevin Zeitler is another one, could be a veteran guy that comes in and just gives them a solid base in pass protection, and with even in some of their run schemes. Mekhi Becton, who had a good year this past year, right, graded I think right around a 70, it would be a solid player to have. I think that's the big thing is it a priority to get big mauling run blockers, or do they feel like none of these players are good enough in pass protection that we'll wait till the draft, we will wait and see? Because look, Jim Harbaugh knows as well as anybody, if you're great in the trenches, you can be a great football team. He did it at Stanford, he did it at San Francisco, he did it at Michigan. That's not going to change, and you saw that even as an emphasis later, I should say last year, not even later in the draft, taking Joe Alt with the 5th overall pick last year. Harbaugh's not going to ignore the trenches, but they're also not going to overpay for players they feel either A, don't fit the culture, or B, don't significantly help them that much, right? I think they still have some guys there. I would assume that Zion Johnson is still going to be a starter there. He was a first-round pick in 2022. But the center spot and that right guard spot, I think, is open for business, whether that be in free agency or in the draft. It's something they're certainly going to look at.
Jason with the super chat, the $10 super chat. We appreciate you, Jason. Now we're talking about the Denver Broncos here. Denver's got 3 pending free agents on the defensive line: Allen, Roach, John Franklin Meyer. So going defensive line in the first round is more likely than most people think. So he's getting a little bit of his draft takes here. Walter Nolan, that is, Kenneth Grant, Tyleik Williams. Thoughts on those guys potentially being targets for the Denver Broncos? He means in the first round, and then potentially hitting tight end and running back in round 2 and round 3, given how deep both of those positions are. Not a bad strategy. Obviously, we talk about Colston Loveland a lot as the target for the Denver Broncos at number 20. When he comes on the board, it's often a lock. We just make that pick right there. But Jason is saying, let's talk about a little bit of a different strategy here. What if they go defensive line, continue to emphasize defense and make sure that unit's as good as it needs to be, even beyond this past year, and then trying to hit tight end and running back. So we don't have to throw out the mock draft simulator, but let's do a little bit of a draft strategy here for them. How do you feel about still going? Let's say Colston Loveland's still on the board. Would you like one of these defensive linemen talking about the overall strategy of going D-line in round 1 and then hitting tight end? I'll look at what picks exactly they have here. They have in the second round 51, and then in the third round they have 85. What do you think about that strategy there for the Broncos?
I think it's plausible, right? When you talk about their edge room really being, let's see, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, Jonah Ellis, Dondre Tillman was pretty good as an undrafted free agent last year. But, if you feel like you can add an impact player to make, again, this defense, if Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw are both healthy, this defense is starting to shape up like it's going to be one of the best in football. I really like especially the Greenlaw signing because linebacker was one of their biggest weaknesses, right? But I think I just keep going back to the comments that Sean Payton made earlier in the offseason about finding those jokers, right, in the offense in a complimentary way. Colston Loveland would be one of those guys for sure, right, as a tight end who can line up anywhere in the formation, right, creating in better terms than just a joker, a matchup problem, right? That's what really Sean Payton's trying to create is matchup problems because he doesn't have enough, and it's not his offense, they're just not a versatile enough set of personnel to do that yet, right? I fully expect one of those day 2 picks to be a running back. You mentioned, what was it, 51 and 85?
Yes.
I would absolutely expect, especially even at 51, I think when you're talking about Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, maybe Caleb Johnson, one of those backs that we think is going to go in the second round, I would fully expect to end up with the Denver Broncos. But you mentioned it. If you want to go edge rusher first round, let's say if it is somebody like Mike Green, if they trust, that all the off-field stuff clears, that's a really talented player, I think worthy of the 20th overall pick, right? And you would add a ton especially to their pass rush, and he was even really good in run defense at Marshall, right? And then you go tight end, look at the tight end options that could be there in the second round. Mason Taylor, Terrence Ferguson, Elijah Arroyo. I think those are guys in the receiving game, especially Arroyo, that they also create matchup problems when you line up around the formation. You get him in that single coverage situation. So I think certainly you have options. And this is where so often, especially in the first round, people think about, well, they have to take this position. I go, no. There's 7 rounds of this draft. They have options. They could trade up or down to target whichever specific guys that they want. But every team has more than one option in the first round, except I don't even know. Even a team like Atlanta that so badly needs a pass rusher, they could still take a corner or something else, right? Every team's got multiple options, and that's what they spend these months doing is planning that roadmap. Okay, if we get an edge player in round 1, what are our other options? If we take a tight end in round 1, what are other options off the edge or at running back? If we, it's just they're planning out that whole roadmap, that 7-round roadmap, as opposed to just going, okay, we get this guy in round 1, and then we start guessing the rest on what will be available. And part of it is a guessing game and what other teams are going to do, but certainly they have 3 or 4 options that they could take at the 20th overall spot and feel good about it.
All right, I lied. Let's throw up the mock draft simulator. I want to run through it. We're talking about the if we have a simulator to be able to do that. So I see a couple of other super chats that I want to get to. Let's do a 3-round Broncos mock draft right here and just knock it out and see what our options are, because Jason has brought up a scenario that I really just did not think of before. So 3 rounds, Denver Broncos. Let's see it. All right, so let's enter the draft. We're not going to take Colston Loveland even if he is available here at number 20. We're instead going to look at some of these defensive options.
Well,
you have James.
Okay, so we're certainly going defense because I think Luther Burden would also be an option here. I know we just did it before for Seattle, but I think he would be at least an option here in the same sort of matchup problem type of thing.
I think Walter Nolan's probably the guy that I would go with here, either Walter Nolan or Kenneth Grant if we're taking one at number 20. Would you agree?
Yeah, I could see that. James Pierce Jr. sitting there too off the edge.
I don't think they'd take James Pierce Jr. though because they have Nick Bonito. So unless they think that he is like just a
special,
full, all around, like defensive end, which I don't think they do. So let's go Walter Nolan here. You want to go Walter Nolan?
I'm in on that. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go Walter Nolan. 51 now in the second round.
You think would Sean Payton like Cam Scatteraboo? Is that a thing for us there?
Oh, damn. I don't think let's go to, who do we got at tight end? Who made it to us at tight end? Can we see tight end? Because I feel like we would go tight end. All right, so Elijah Arroyo
would make a lot of sense.
Let's do Arroyo. Arroyo, I'm not saying he's Jimmy Graham, but he is now the player that Sean Payton can sort of put in that tight end receiving emphasis role.
Same school.
He did go to the same school.
Yeah, it might just
You know what? Forget it. You know how they say, don't scout the helmet, scout the individual player? Screw it. We're scouting the helmet.
We're helmet scouting.
He's going to be Jimmy
Let's
Graham
go.
again.
Simplest way to scout.
Easy, yeah. Boom. Easy. Elijah, you want the next Jimmy Graham? It's right there. Elijah Arroyo. All right, let's do Arroyo at 51. And then 85. Who's left at running back? Oh, RJ Harvey. Let's go. Let's see who else is left at running back.
BJ Giddens, I know you have sitting right there as well.
To me, this is RJ Harvey or DJ Giddens.
I'm with you. I think Harvey. I have Harvey. Just like you have there. I have Harvey as the top guy remaining out of that group. So yeah, I'm in on RJ Harvey.
Okay, RJ Harvey. All right. So this is a draft strategy then. If we don't prioritize tight end, this is what we're looking at here. Walter Nolan, Elijah Arroyo, RJ Harvey. I like it. Okay, can we speed run one more? Because I want to see then back to back what that looks like versus just having Loveland in the first round and then seeing what we could get like interior defensive line and then running back a little bit later, like as a draft strategy there. So all right, let's enter the draft.
So if he's here, we're taking Loveland here if he's sitting here.
Yes, yeah. Take Loveland.
All right.
Take Loveland there at 20. And then interior defensive linemen or running backs.
See, is this my Scattaboo moment? Am I getting that now?
It might be. Let's go to interior defensive line. Is there anybody that is like dominant that we can't move on from? No. Go running back.
I could wait.
Yeah, we could wait. I could wait. This is scat to me.
I think it's Scattaboo. Yeah.
This is Scattaboo to me. Okay, let's draft Scattaboo at 51, and then which interior defensive lineman do we have here?
Jordan Phillips.
Jordan Phillips could be nice. Could we sort interior defensive line, please?
Did you read?
I like.
Did you read
West.
the thing? I don't know if it came out today or yesterday. Did you read the thing about Deion Walker?
Yeah, he played with a broken back or something. I didn't read the details of it, but
which is some lower back fracture that he played. Like he only missed one game all year. I just thought that was crazy. I was like, oh, okay, maybe that explains a little bit of it. But that's wild. I mean,
pretty crazy.
That's tough. I mean, it depends on the type you're looking for. If you want a pass rusher with potential, you take Walker or Peebles. If you want a run stopper, I would take CJ West. He's an absolute plug in the
Yeah, I would take CJ West too. Can I see defensive ends really quick before we make our final call here? Because there might be some.
No, I'd go inside.
Yeah, I'd probably go CJ West. All right, so let's see CJ West. So there we go. We ran through a couple of draft strategies there for you guys. And the first one, we didn't prioritize tight end, and we went with Walter Nolan. Then we got Elijah Arroyo, then RJ Harvey. And in this one, it's Colson Loveland, Cam Scattaboo, and CJ West. I don't hate either of them, but I am more intrigued by the non-Colson Loveland strategy than I thought that I was going to be.
I think it just, again, it's that first pick that sets up the road for the rest of the draft, right? You see how we got a completely different set of players, and I think any of it could work. I mean, this is what the analysts and the scouts up there sit up there doing, is going, okay, which of these guys in what rounds fit our team the best? And Sean Payton's going to have to make those decisions. I do think, too, if he were to fall this far, I think he would love Quinshon Judkins, too. I think he would remind him even a lot of Mark Ingram when he had him back in the day with the Saints. Is just that guy who gets me 5 yards anytime I need it. So I think Judkins could work. I think Scattaboo could work. And it wouldn't even shock me if they were a team with their running back situation. Obviously, Javonte Williams went to Dallas. If they took two, if you took one in round 2 and one in round 5, and you had two guys that complement each other, and you really remake that whole room.
Man, I just love how split people are on Scattaboo. Like, just there are some people who are like, no, absolutely not. Wouldn't even think about him on day 2. And I'm over here like, dude, I'd draft that guy day 2 easy.
I would take him right there at 51. I have no issue with that. He's just an absolute dog, right? I could sit here and talk about him all day. He's one of the most fun guys in college football to watch the last 2 years.
Toro Burrow gave us a $5 super chat as well. Want to move on there. Shout out to Jason. Appreciate you getting us in that Denver Broncos conversation. That was a lot of fun. We have another super chat. Shout out for the super chat here. We appreciate you. Assuming the Browns are the biggest upgrade on the offensive side of things, considering coaching and all that, who do you think has made the biggest improvement defensively? I think the Broncos are potentially one of those teams, adding Talanoa Hufanga, adding Drake Greenlaw to an already good unit. I think that's there. But I think the answer is probably the Patriots, right? Given all that they brought to the defensive side of the football, I think that the Patriots, to me, are the defensive unit that has improved the most. So I would lean the New England Patriots there. What do you think about the defensive side of the football? Especially if we get to factor in the fact that Mike Vrabel is now, the brain trust or the guy who's the puppet master of this roster and the coaching and all that with the defense.
Yeah, New England adding that much talent is one. I think another one that you have to like, it's a team we talked about earlier in the show, the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, you look at Jonathan Allen, they kept Byron Murphy, Javon Hargrave, Isaiah Rodgers, again, I think is a very underrated signing. They extended Theo Jackson at safety. We'll see what they're doing at safety moving forward. And obviously in the draft, I think they're still going to continue to add to this defense. But I think the Minnesota Vikings, when you talk about targeting what they really needed to at defensive tackle and at corner, I think that's a huge deal considering some of the other spots, especially in the front seven that they were kind of set at. And I think, the Giants with this secondary too, we mentioned it before with the Debo and Holland. I think those are big moves for them. And if they can get Dexter Lawrence obviously healthy up front, then they're looking a little bit better on defense. You know what one of the stories for me is too, and the Chargers were one of the teams that was mentioned, is maybe a couple other teams that haven't done as much as we thought, right, on defense especially. I think about a team, like, I don't think we've mentioned them yet, like the Arizona Cardinals. I thought they would be, I know they got Josh Sweat and they kept Baron Browning, but I thought that was a team that would be a little more active in fixing this defense and getting some of these bigger names. Maybe a Charvarius Ward could have been a target. Maybe even, somebody else at corner, a DJ Reed. It just feels like that was one to me that kind of underwhelmed a little bit. I know we're going in the conversation of who did the best, but I think maybe there's even some opportunity cost with some of these other teams with so much of that talent going to New England, so much of it going to Minnesota. I think there's a couple of teams here that missed out. I don't know if you have one of those also.
I'm just fixated on this comment in the chat. Jason said, Scadaboo is John Wick. I don't know what that means. I love it because I love the John Wick movies and I love Cam Scadaboo.
I think that's a good thing. I'm pretty sure that would be a good thing in a football sense.
Have you seen any of the John Wick movies?
I haven't, but I get the idea.
Oh, come on. All right, when free agency's over.
I was sitting around watching Drew Dahlman tape last night. I don't have time for movies.
It's true. I can't blame you on that. You're doing your job correctly, and we love you for it. But the second that free agency is over, John Wick Marathon, we need to get on it here. All right, a couple more super chats that I want to get to because we saw those, and I want to make sure we don't miss them. CJ saying, where do the Eagles go long-term at safety? Currently have Sidney Brown and Lewis Cine. No chance Howie takes one on day one, right? We talked about this on yesterday's show. I fully believe that they feel as though they can move on from CJ Gardner-Johnson because of Sidney Brown. I'm a big Sidney Brown guy. I think that he is, as Walt was saying in the chat yesterday, a dog. I really do believe that he is a great football player. When he is fully healthy, he can do a lot of different things for you as a strong safety, as a slot defender. I even think that he's got the speed and the range to play some single high situations for you as well. So I know that people look at this CJ Gardner-Johnson move and go, okay, we got to panic here. What are the Eagles going to do at safety? I genuinely think that they've got a lot of faith that Sidney Brown could be that guy for them moving forward. What do you think?
There have also been rumors, and I brought this up yesterday, about possibly Vic Fangio reuniting with Justin Simmons just to get another veteran presence in there. I think Simmons, I forget what podcast he was on, but he was talking about, well, obviously I've got a connection to Fangio and some of my best days were in Denver. So that could be an option. You could see them sign a cheaper veteran option. I know you really like Sidney Brown. You were clamoring for that yesterday, playing alongside Reed Blankenship. And I think, I don't know. And look, at this point with the draft and with the way the Eagles operate and Howie Roseman the way it is there really anything that would surprise us at all? I mean, everything Howie Roseman does makes this football team better, right? It could be. And you look at, it's kind of funny because you look at some of their needs now and you go, okay, Darius Slay has left. CJ Gardner-Johnson was traded. A couple of defensive linemen are gone. They need a right guard to replace Mekhi Becton if they're not going to re-sign him. There's actually multiple needs on this Eagles team. Now, obviously, is a lot of details. Absolutely, but it's not like these needs aren't going to get filled. So Howie Roseman does have, I think, more work to do than we thought coming into this season. I'm looking at some options for him at safety. I mean, I don't know if he would fall this far because of the athletic traits, but would somebody like a Nicky Manwari be an option if he were to fall to 32, right? I think somebody like that, somebody who's going to play in those two high looks next to Reed Blankenship. I don't know if they'll do it in round one. I know they're always prioritizing trenches. I would expect that to be the case again, whether it's somebody, say, like a Tyler Booker if he gets there, or we mentioned Nick Skorton yesterday in our mock draft. I think they would still prioritize trenches, but I think safety's certainly on the board. Anytime that Howie Roseman can improve any unit on his team, they're going to think about that. And again, I actually think now, the more I think about it, corner's an underrated need. You lost Darius Slay. You lost Isaiah Rodgers. If you want to keep Cooper DeJean in the slot, you need to find a starter at that other outside corner slot.
Mm-hmm. I just can't see them going safety. Again, maybe it's just because I believe in Sidney Brown so much, but you talk about Nicky Manwari, you talk about Malachi Starks, the chat's talking about Malachi Starks as well. Good football players, so they're on the table, they're on the conversation.
He would think about
I just
Starks
don't think
if
that
he
they
was
will
there.
go. What'd you say?
If Starks was there, I think he would highly consider him to get him at a value
I think he's
at 32.
a great football player. I just think that they have other plans. Like, I think that they believe that they have two legitimate safeties, but maybe I'm wrong. Hey, we got over 1,200 people watching the show. We have for a while now. We appreciate you guys so much. It's a lot of fun for us to do these live shows. If you don't already, please subscribe to the channel. We're going live again at 4 p.m. today once the new league year opens up. We're going to go live the next day as well, talking about winners and losers. We're going to give you grades for every single free agency haul for every single team. So we got a lot of free agency recap stuff, and then we'll turn the page and see how this all impacts the draft as well. So we're going to be having great content for you guys throughout the entire offseason here on the PFF YouTube channel. So if you are not subscribed to it, please subscribe to us and make that happen. We would absolutely love to have you back for some future shows. Wags gave us a super chat. Make sure I didn't want to miss this one. What do you guys see the Texans doing today or in the future? He's talking about like the citizens of the state of Texas, probably eating barbecue, listening to country music, maybe a line dancing, some high school football, rodeos. Heard that's pretty big in there. So that's what I would see local Texans doing. No, but of course, the Houston Texans, they move on from Laramie Tunsil, move on from Kendrick Green, a lot of changes to that interior offensive line. A lot of shifting going around one way or the other. Very clearly, this is a culture-setting offseason here for the Houston Texans. They've made a lot of moves that were kind of surprising from us, but I guess the people who are covering the Houston Texans aren't that surprised with it. So, Dalton, any specific moves that you could see this team making, whether it's today or in the future? Could bring a draft focus into this as well.
I don't know if they have any specific names in mind, but the obvious is the offensive line. I mean, I know we say this for a lot of teams, but if you can't pass protect, you're not a contender. Trev, 7 of the last 8 Super Bowl champions have been in the top 7 in pass blocking grade. Okay.
I thought you were going to say use Cherry Bundy.
That's 8 out of 8. We know it's all of them. They all use Cherry Bundy, of course. And the only team that wasn't in the top 7 was your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and even then they were at 14, right? Houston was at 21st this past year, and now they've gotten rid of their best offensive linemen. So, look, as far as specific names, maybe they think about it, Tevin Jenkins. They've already signed Laken Tomlinson, but that's a Band-Aid just to get through this year. There's been talk so far about how they're currently constructed. They're going to play Titus Howard at left tackle, Blake Fisher at right tackle, fill in the inside around Tomlinson. I can't see that being a viable solution, even just for 2025. And I know this just became, especially with getting a couple of 2026 picks from Washington, it became a long-term project. And I don't love the way the window is lining up now with C.J. Stroud heading into his 3rd year. But the next year or two is going to be spent fixing this offensive line. Possibly this year picking in the mid-20s. Who knows where they'll be picking next year and how much they can protect him. But they had other needs on this team as well. When you talk about defensive tackle, maybe more depth at linebacker, certainly at receiver, where right now it just looks like Nico Collins and not much else for 2025. But none of it matters if you don't protect Stroud. So that's all I'm looking for through the rest of free agency in through the draft. How in the world now do we protect him? Do we draft a new left tackle and move Titus Howard back somewhere else? I mean, are we really relying on Blake Fisher, the young right tackle, 3rd-round pick I believe he was last year, to just be that guy at right tackle? It's going to be it's going to be some tough sledding here for the Texans. And again, we don't know what was going on behind the scenes. Maybe they felt this was all necessary, but any team that can't pass protect on a darn near primetime level, you're not going to be considered serious contenders. We've seen too many teams where that was the sole reason that they lost, and that was the reason the Texans lost to Kansas City this year.
I mean, there's some offensive linemen who are still available, but if these numbers are correct from Houston, they don't really have a lot of money. They're basically right around the cap floor. Moving on from Tunsil the way that they did, and Kendrick Green, these trades, it's not like it freed up a ton of money for them, at least from what I had seen in the reporting and what we've got now for the numbers of how much cap space they have available. They're kind of done, especially after the Laken Tomlinson signing. So we can call out some of the free agents that are still available. I mean, Cam Robinson's still out there. Jedrick Wills is still out there. Trenton Brown, Joe Noteboom, Kelvin Beachum. A guy versatile guy like Fred Johnson, Josh Myers.
Well, I even think about if they could get him at, you're talking about bargain shopping, right? And if you're talking about the Lions maybe not bringing back a Kevin Zeitler, right? I think that's an upgrade on what they currently have. If you got him on, I don't know, something like 1 year and $7 or $8 million, I think that's something they could tolerate with their cap situation. But I don't even know how much they have to do that. They're right around the cap floor as far as I see it. I mean,
you can move money around one way or the other.
These teams they always find a way, which is the fun part. I just don't know
if they're going to. I think it's much more likely that they're going to be aggressive in the draft and try to trade up to go get an offensive tackle that way than spend money on a free agent. That's my thoughts.
Weren't they one of your teams though that doesn't have a ton of resources? I mean, now they do, I guess, with this trade, with the Tunsil trade, but even that, they still only have 6 picks. They only have 6 picks this year.
Yeah, that's the thing is we need, because the order's not correct until the league year opens and we actually get the official trade that goes through, I believe. But yeah, the Texans have a first, they have a second. Now they've got, an extra third and an extra fourth this year. They have their own third. They have Miami's third as well. So they've got plenty of draft capital now to be able to move up. It's my thoughts.
But are you selling out to move up to get that one big impact player, or is this a situation where within those, I'm looking at 4 picks in the top 90, do you need to take 2 offensive linemen? And do you need to stay patient and take multiple guys as opposed to selling out most of your draft or part of next year's draft, those picks you just acquired, to go and get maybe somebody like a Kelvin Banks? I mean, I think this is a balance now, because if you do that, then your offensive line is still built like it was last year with 1 star, a younger one at that, and a bunch of other guys who were average at best.
I don't disagree with them having a draft strategy of taking multiple offensive linemen, but I also think they need to absolutely nail one of them. So again, if a Kelvin Banks is falling, if a Josh Simmons is falling, whatever, I could see them waiting a little bit. And if the sort of the fringe top 20 area comes around, I look at a team like the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers are always a team that's looking to trade back because Jason loves to draft. So you're only hopping up, 6 spots for Houston? Yeah, from 25 to 19. So you're hopping up 6 spots. You can go and get an offensive lineman who's fallen a little bit within that top 20 range. Tampa gets to move back a little bit. And it probably wouldn't cost you a ton to be able to do that. So when I say aggressive, I'm not necessarily saying aggressive into the top 10 to try to go get Armand Membu or Will Campbell or anybody like that. But if one of those guys, or Josh Simmons or Kelvin Banks, like I mentioned, is falling towards the back end of the top 20, and you think that they're an immediate starter for your football team, that's where I actually feel as though the Texans could be getting aggressive here. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. They're going to be fascinating to watch I think that over the next 2 years, and how they fix that situation, and now the amount of draft capital, especially in 2026, that they have.
We had somebody shout out the Cincinnati Bengals a little bit earlier in the chat. So they franchised T. Higgins, signed B.J. Hill, re-signed Mike Gesicki, signed T.J. Slayton, signed Orion Burks as well, but they're moving on from Akeem Davis-Gaither, so it's a little bit of one in, one out there. Re-signed Joseph Osai. They released Alex Kappa. Re-signed guys like Tanner Hudson, Samaje Perine. Again, you guys can see all of these moves over at PFF.com with the free agency tracker there. Thoughts on the Cincinnati Bengals? Obviously, getting T. Higgins back was a big deal, but it's not on a long-term deal. It's just a franchise tag. You've got the looming Trey Hendrickson isn't happy situation. So what are your thoughts on Cincinnati? Have their draft needs changed? Are they more aggressive for one position one way or the other with what they've done here?
Well, obviously the Hendrickson story is hanging over them. There's a couple of these signings I like. I mean, I like keeping B.J. Hill. He's a good player when he's healthy. Oren Burks is a really good depth linebacker to have, either spot starter, third linebacker type. I think in total, when you look at this free agency haul, they're kind of spinning their wheels, right? You don't see anything that makes an impactful difference, right? Obviously, it's great to keep T. Higgins for another year, hopefully long-term. Mike Gesicki was a good add to their offense. He was their third leading receiver last year, but this team looks pretty much exactly the same as it did during the season this past year when they went 9-8. Their defense wasn't good enough, right? So I think there's going to be, especially if Trey Hendrickson does get traded, I think there's a mountain of pressure on Cincinnati in this draft. I think especially on the defensive side, releasing Alex Kappa, they need a guard. I mean, they could use, to me, I think another running back to go with Chase Brown. I like Chase Brown, but I don't think he brings you that big explosive element to the backfield. I think they could use some speed back there. Even a slot receiver wouldn't hurt them to have if they had the luxury of taking one. I look at this Bengals team right now the same as I did at the end of the season. I just go, you have one of the 3 or 4 best quarterbacks in football. Obviously, you have Chase and Higgins. That's what gives you a chance to win. But the rest of this team looks about the same as it did before free agency. So I don't think they've done a whole lot to make a big impact for themselves, to make a difference, to catch up to Baltimore and how well-rounded their team is, or even a team like Pittsburgh, as good as their defense is. You need to be able to make stops in big moments, and the Bengals didn't do that enough last year. And if they walk in with their defense the way it is right now, I don't think they're going to be able to do it next year, especially if they trade Trey Hendrickson. I think there's going to be an increased emphasis, maybe with that 17th overall pick off the edge. We know defensive tackle's a need. We know they need another linebacker, maybe next to Logan Wilson. Defensive back is always something they're looking at. And I'll be curious to see what types of players Al Golden is looking for, too, as the new defensive coordinator. You could get a change in philosophy there, but I don't look at this Bengals team much different than I did, say, a month ago.
Hold on, I gotta find this in the chat. The Fantasy Plumber, shout out.
Great
says
name.
The Bengals. What?
Great name, by the way.
Great
Love
name.
that.
It says the Bengals need to blow it up and acquire some picks, trade T and Trey Hendrickson, and reset everything that you got going on. Basically, saying, hey, you pay Joe Burrow, pay Jamar Chase, reset the rest of it. So I got 2 questions for you here. One, I don't think Cincinnati's going to do this. I don't think they're going to do it.
They're not doing that. They might trade Trey, but they're not trading T. Higgins at this point, I don't think.
Do you think T gets the same trade value that DK Metcalf got? Because that's around the second round, 50th type of a pick. Now, any team, it's the same situation as DK Metcalf. Anybody who's trading for him knows that they have to sign him to a massive contract. So that's coming. So do you think that he gets the same sort of treatment when it comes to draft pick value compensation that DK Metcalf got?
I think he could. I think we could go back to a theory we had earlier on this show. Let's take the Carolina Panthers. Would T. Higgins, first of all, do we think T. Higgins would be enough an upgrade? He's like, okay, he's their wide receiver 1, right? I think that would be close enough to it where you go, okay, that's an impact guy to add. I think that's the question. Would you give up, let's say if you're Carolina, the 57th overall pick for T. Higgins plus you have to pay him? Honestly, I think if I'm a team like that, I think I would. I think I would do that. I think especially if you're a team as desperate for something close to a wide receiver 1. T. Higgins is at the very least the top 20 wide receiver, I would say.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think that would be worth it, roughly the same price. They're in different styles. I think they're at least about roughly equal players, him and DK Metcalf, and a second-round pick makes a good amount of sense. I just think if you're doing that alone, let's say you're getting a second-round pick for Higgins, and maybe you're getting a second-round pick for Hendrickson.
I was about to say, do you get a first for Hendrickson? He's on the last year of his deal. You owe him $21 million. He's 31 years old. He's going to want a new contract. But he's very clearly still one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. If Detroit calls you today and says, we will give you 28 for Trey Hendrickson, do you do it?
If I'm the Bengals, I do that. Okay. I think it would very much depend on the first. Atlanta would not give the 15 for Trey Hendrickson. But if you're looking
at... a lot of people in the chat are saying that there's some rumors right now for Hendrickson and the Atlanta Falcons, but they wouldn't be giving up 15. No.
If Detroit with 28 or Washington with 29 came calling with that for Hendrickson, I think then you pull the trigger, right? That's close enough where, we've been talking about there could be an edge rusher, a good edge rusher that falls, a Mike Green, a James Pierce Jr. There's been kind of wildly different mock drafts on those two guys especially. I think you could if it's a pick high enough that you feel you could find your replacement for either or, especially for Hendrickson off the edge in this draft where the defensive line class is so deep, then I think you think about it. Because Trey right now wants out. That's the difference, is T hasn't necessarily asked out. He's just getting stuck with the franchise tag and continuing to negotiate. They're in a tough spot. I mean, because even with those guys, the team is very thin. Right, I mean that's basically the Cincinnati Bengals is Burrow, right. Chase, Higgins, and Hendrickson.
They're teetering on the flexibility. I mean, for as much as us saying, "Hey, let's explore what it looks like to blow up the team." I mean, that's basically where they are.
Well, and if
you're not going to bring back Hendrickson, you're basically blowing up the team outside of 3 players, right?
And if you do trade Trey or T or both, the other factor in this is how much are you further irritating Joe Burrow?
Oh, sure.
I mean, because he's been very adamant about this is what he wants this team to look like, and it looks like it's not going to look like that long term because they still haven't signed T long term. They still haven't signed Jamar Chase long term, and they were talking about highest paid non-QB in football, and then Myles Garrett got his contract. So are we holding the $40 million a year for Chase?
Bad, man.
They have backed themselves into a corner.
Don't say stuff like that. Don't say stuff like that.
They have backed themselves into every corner they could possibly back themselves into. You have the league leader in sacks that wants money. You have a top 5 receiver that wants a boatload of money. You have a number 2 receiver that wants a boatload of money. And you have Joe Burrow, who's been the one adamant about keeping this core together. It's not a great vibe over here in Cincinnati right now. The guys behind the glass, they tell me that all the time. They already know. I hear it enough from them. But they have backed themselves into every single corner that they possibly could. And this is the result of
it. What they said about Jamar Chase is just it's at the time I think they were truthful, right? But now they're in trouble because if Jamar Chase's agent is just going to be able to go,
you said you were going to do it.
Quotes. Look at what you said. This is what you said. We're not going to settle for anything less. Justin Jefferson right now makes the most of any wide receiver per year, and it's at $35 million. Myles Garrett was just signed for $40 million a year. So now you have to talk about him signing for more than $5 million above what Justin Jefferson signed. That's nuts. Or if you want to say, well, they don't have to do it by a per year basis. If you want to go total guarantees, because that's also probably what Jamar Chase's camp is either going to say, okay, you either need to get us to that number at average per year or the total guarantees. Nick Bosa signed a guaranteed deal of that included, when he signed his contract included $122 million in guarantees. So now you're going to go over that? It's a mess, man. Cincinnati's in a tough spot because that $122 million guarantee total that Nick Bosa had is more than Justin Jefferson again, who had $110 million fully guaranteed. So they're the longer this offseason goes, the longer that these guys go unpaid, the worse it gets for Cincinnati. And the closer I think we actually get to them maybe blowing it up. So
it's tough.
It's
real tough. It's tough to watch right now when you've got other teams like we've seen in the past, San Francisco, Philadelphia, that sign their guys early and it pays off.
So again, I know it's a risk for the J.C. Horn deal, but I can understand the vision. I understand what Carolina's doing. They're trying to get way ahead of the curve with one of their best players. All right, sure, yeah, he's the highest paid player at the position right now, and that's going to last for like
a month.
8 months, maybe. Might last for 3 months. Who knows? Because those guys are in the last year of their contract. So, anyways, I've been driving the show, I feel like, for the last hour and a half. Any team or any signing that I didn't hit on that you really want to hit on? I mean, just to recap some of them, we had Peyton Turner going to the Dallas Cowboys, signed a 1-year, $3 million deal, so not a lot there, but just sort of recapping what happened. Some other deals that we didn't touch on, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka going to the Cleveland Browns in a 1-year, $4.75 million deal. Eric Stokes going to the Raiders, so the Raiders trying to get a potential outside corner, a guy who was a former first-round pick, 1 year, $4 million. He's been beat up throughout his career, but somebody who is talented when he's out there, so I can understand that one. Kenneth Gainwell to the Pittsburgh Steelers, 1-year deal there. I like the 1-2 of him and Jalen Warren. Anybody else, whether it was a recent signing, whether it was one of these teams that you want to touch on that we haven't talked about here?
If we hadn't mentioned it already, I think Leonard Floyd to Atlanta. I mean, for a team that just needs a boatload of pass rush help from anywhere they can get it, I think this is a solid signing. I believe Raheem Morris wasn't Floyd on the Rams at one point, or Raheem Morris has some sort of familiarity with Leonard Floyd. So again, it's about connections here. But you're talking about a guy last year. The grades weren't great because of how much he had to rush the passer, and it was kind of inconsistent. But still talking about a guy in total with 44 pressures and 11 sacks this past year. I think it's at least somebody who can help Atlanta's pass rush, right? It's the thing I've been screaming for months on end, is that if they don't have any sort of pass rush, they're not going to win a whole lot of big football games. So I think Floyd, at least in some sort of rotational role, maybe gives them a little bit more than they got out of Matt Judon last year. I would still expect edge rusher to be the favorite among the picks at number 15 for them in the draft, but with not a whole lot of money and picking 15th in the draft, maybe not getting their first pick, obviously not going to get a player like an Abdul Carter. The Falcons, they really need to nail it this offseason in their pass rush, but I think Floyd's a good signing, at least as a rotational guy that can give them something more than they had last year when they were, I believe, the second worst pass rush team in the league ahead of Carolina.
We got somebody in the chat saying, did you guys miss talking about Tampa signing with getting Hassan Reddick? I'm so shocked by this Hassan Reddick signing. Jason, look, they've obviously done their homework. They're an organization that does their homework before they sign these players, but with what happened last year with Hassan Reddick and the New York Jets, just this massive lack of communication, and he was going to sign the deal and then he wasn't, and the Jets changed the deal on him, and so it was just like a bad faith business deal. Just so much turmoil that happened with Hassan Reddick. I'm just very shocked that Tampa was in on him, but it's perfect for what they need. They need that stand-up outside linebacker type of a rusher, so I think that it was a good signing for them. Chase Dreams is wanting us to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've already kind of talked about it over the last couple of days. The big trade and signing for DK Metcalf, I think, makes sense for them, but only if they trade George Pickens, because, it's either George Pickens or if they sign Russell Wilson and they're just going to go with the offensive moonball strategy for their passing attack. Other than that, until they trade George Pickens, I don't really love the move. I think it's a bit redundant, and I think you're paying a very heavy price for some redundancy there at the receiver position. So that's my thoughts with the Steelers. Your thoughts on the Steelers here?
We're just kind of right now in the holding pattern with the quarterback situation. Is it going to be Aaron Rodgers? Could it be Russell Wilson? Where does that go as far as the draft? Do they think about somebody like a Jackson Dart that's been rumored at number 21? Do they take someone day 2, day 3? I think that's the big story for me with Pittsburgh. I don't know that it's officially gone through yet or what's happened with it. The Darius Slay signing, if that's a thing. Again, I think you're right. It is redundant. Having DK Metcalf makes you better than you were before. It also puts an emphasis on the vertical passing game. I wouldn't hate to see them diversify with a slot receiver who can take a lot of targets and set that up and kind of complement each other. But I think the story right now with the Steelers is maybe less than any team in football, even the Giants, because I still think the Giants are taking a quarterback high in the draft. I think we know less about the Steelers quarterback situation than any team in football. And when you have that problem, it's an issue. It's an issue for Mike Tomlin. It's an issue for a team that feels like they haven't prioritized offense really in the last 5 or 6 years, right? They just haven't made that big push. They just continue to want to win their way, to win with defense, to win with physicality, and that's great. But if you have no threat of a passing game or no, even last year it was just chucking up go balls and praying, doesn't work like that. The NFL doesn't work like that, right? So I think that's where we're at with the Steelers. We're really in a holding pattern, especially with regards to Aaron Rodgers' situation, Russell Wilson's situation, whatever they're going to do in the long term.
We're going to wrap up this show here, but we're going to be back with you guys at 4 p.m. today. We're going to go live once again at 4 p.m. Eastern when the new league year opens up. So there's some moves that have been reported that we think are going to happen over the last couple of days, but until we get to the new league year, we don't know what's officially official. So we're going to be back with you guys. So all the questions that you guys are firing off, all these conversations, save them, and we'll be able to talk about them once things become official at that 4 p.m. Eastern mark. So make sure, again, you are subscribed to the channel so you get that notification that we're going live. We're going to go live one more time today, and I'm excited about it. I'm so excited to see what is official and what hasn't been from the reports and the tweets and everything that we have seen over the last couple of days, because then we get the official draft order change, all that good stuff. It's going to be exciting. Please join us again at 4 p.m. Eastern today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Until then, I'm Trevor Sikkema. That's Dalton Wasserman. Thank you guys so much for watching the PFF NFL show. We'll see you guys at 4 p.m.